What the hell? They're making a movie out of Skip the Toilet? I cannot believe that. With Michael Bay? That sounds pretty good.
with Michael Bay.
Watch it. I would watch it. The Skibbity, I what do the Toilet guys fight even? It's like the Radioheads, right? I have a lot of Gen Alpha cousins, so I keep up with the lore a little bit. A little bit.
Just a little bit. I have no idea. I just kind of check it out to see like is if it's like still popular, and it really is, which is really what like kind of baffles me. It's just feel like
I mean, if you look at the shit that, for example, like the shit that I watched was like SpongeBob in China or Hemp Bob when I was a kid. Those were like my YouTube classics, basically. I can't say I was doing any better. I was watching like SpongeBob living out of like a bong or something on YouTube. So it's
no. To be fair, yeah. To be fair, the brain rots back then was also like kind of the same level.
it was a little bit worse. I feel like because it wasn't controlled at all whatsoever. Like there was no parental controls on YouTube.
Oh no no. We had the peak YouTube. We got to see like a bunch of people spreading like Nazi shit, and we didn't even know it. We're like just eating it up.
We got to see yeah, we got to see all that shit pretty much. But you know what? YouTube was nice back then because you could watch full episodes, like pirated, like of Naruto and like Sonic, SpongeBob.
That's where I watched Dragon Ball.
But it had to be cut up. It had to be cut up into like ten minute parts.
10-minute parts, which I didn't mind, honestly. I ate the shit up.
Yeah, yeah. Me and my cousins watched a couple good movies back then. A couple Disney movies, everything like that. I don't- Well, that's back then. It kind of sucks now. YouTube's been so corporatized, sanitized. You kind of wish they would go back to when it was more
No, it's evil YouTube. I think this is like a different version, different evil of YouTube.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the brain rot's still here, obviously. The brain rot is.
It's still there, and that never leaves,
Because the
obviously.
brain rot's different. I don't know. I don't know. Gen Alpha brain rot is different than Gen Z brain rot. Gen Z brain rot was more like Rick
Distracting.
ear, really bad. It was like a bunch of adult jokes that went over our heads, basically. S- for Z and Alpha, it's nonsense. For us, it was like drug jokes and like racial jokes and everything that just went over our heads and we didn't understand them. But yeah, hey, folks, what's going on? We got Adam. I almost called you Jordan. I'm so fucking after right now. It's okay. We got Adam on. He's a TikToker. He does political commentary. You want to describe yourself?
Yeah, I'm just basically um a person who just studied politics their entire life, did MUN, and then it became all of a sudden my entire identity. And then I just started getting digging deeper, and then started discussing politics on TikTok, on a platform, Twitter, Instagram, just trying to, you know, say something.
Yeah, yeah. How did you become a leftist? That's always my favorite question to ask. Like, how did you get to your current ideology, whatever it is?
I think it's really funny. I don't know if I'm very specific in this. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that started on the alt-right pipeline, especially kind of from YouTube, When you watch PewDiePie, you watch Jordan Peterson, it leads to Jordan Peterson, then somehow it leads to Ben Shapiro, and then feminists being owned. And then I used to keep up with people like Ben Shapiro when I was 17 about. And then he started saying certain things that I started disagreeing with. I think I was at a part where I just went into the SJW owned, but when he started talking about like climate change,
Yeah.
and he started saying that, oh, climate change isn't real. I'm like, okay, that's not real, but this is not true. And then like Steven Crowder started saying like, oh, guns are a good thing. I'm like, that was also not true.
Right.
I think just kind of like separating myself from like the cultural aspect or the culture war aspect of it, and started looking into um logical things, logical answers, and logical thinking, then you kind of start going into the kind of left pipeline. And I think slowly, especially with also studying politics and going to uni, it just shifted me more and more to the left, I think.
For sure. For sure. I think one thing that the neo Nazis are really good at is winning the culture war. Honestly, like they're so good at that pipeline sort of thing where it's like it starts out with. Well, first of all, it starts out with just non-political content. Like it'll be like a working out video, like a bodybuilding video or like a video game, and it slowly but surely everything you cannot be separated from ideology, and they start slipping in their ideology here or there, and they hit you eventually on this pipeline of feminist owned or liberal owned or some kind of culture war bullshit like, oh my god, Ariel is black, like the Little Mermaid, yeah, now, and they sure somehow get from that to white replacement. Like it's insane. Um,
It's very easy.
it is, and I think part of it is that being a Nazi is a lot more normal. It's a lot if you're raised in a liberal framework, it's a lot easier to become a Nazi. I feel like the pipeline is there. If you believe in liberalism, if you believe that everything in the world is equal, and it has been equal since like 1964, the Civil Rights Act or whatever was passed, then it's so much easier to believe that minorities should shut the fuck up, that they're not oppressed. It believe that colonialism did nothing, it's just a lot easier when you believe in liberalism to fall into no,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think it's kind of the same where like whether you kind of start in this pipeline, people either just stick out of it or become more hardlined towards this sort of ideology. And I think a lot of them are currently getting it at such a young age. Like even now today, you could walk around and you would find people talking about what's his name? People like Sneeko, Aiden Ross, Andrew Tate, which by themselves are also uh they're pretty alt-right, you could say.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like the people that see like the funny aspect of it or the fun aspect of it, and they just like start sticking into it in the fan base. But I think also kind of the problem that exists and which always exists is that certain way in which I would say other leftists would react to this sort of information and would react to these sort of um, people and ideologies also kind of perpetuates a person who is in the alt-right to become further alt-right
Mm.
because you can't change someone's mind within 4 sentences. And I think because they spew hatred and then hatred is spewed back, and then it reaches the point where like I'm too deep in, I can't pull out. And you keep saying that I'm stupid, and you keep saying that my ideologies are just inherently wrong.
Yeah.
And if I agree to that, then it'll show that I've been stupid this whole time. So I can either mature and try to open my perspectives or just double down to make it seem like, no, I'm not an idiot and I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like online discourse is just centered around, it's not centered around, meaningful conversations, it's just ratioing each other, getting points over each other, winning each other. It's sort of debate bro culture, and debate bro culture is not really about having substantive conversations, it's about, winning from your opponent, quote, unquote, like, ideologically, and, yeah, it's not very good towards Discord. Yeah, no, it's amazing how easy kids are able to fall into it though. My half brother is 13, and the last time I was visiting him, he was watching Andrew Tate or something. Like he was like, "Oh yeah, this was awesome," and it's just like he's 12. He has no conception of anything about the world, but somehow he fell into the Andrew Tate pipeline. Thankfully, it was his birthday. All his friends are around him, and they're saying like, this Andrew Tate sucks. You shouldn't be watching him. So I'm like, you know what? His friends got it. Like his friends are keeping him in check at least. But
No, yeah.
it's they're winning the culture war, and I think part of it is in order to become a leftist, a communist, a socialist, you have to unlearn everything that you're taught by liberal society. Uh, and that's so hard. It's like a deconstruction of everything you've been taught in education, in media, it's painful. To become a communist is painful. To become a right winger is easy. To become a neo Nazi is easy. You simply just take everything you were taught and then you say, you know what, the minorities are being too rowdy. They're asking for. We already gave them equality. The women are being too rowdy. We already gave them equality. Why don't they shut the fuck up and give me rights? I'm the oppressed one. So I think that's part of it. If you want to pick up on any of the threads I'm laying down.
Yeah, I don't know if you agree as well, but I think it's just like the problem is like most people are socialist and communist ideologically, and they're so close constantly to the arguments. For example, when people complain about uh or like, far right individuals or even like, they're still a part of the working class. So they would still share the same complaints as the working class. They would kind of look into the problem of increased housing prices, increased price of foods, water, any resources, anything you need to, just live as a human being. They recognize these same complaints. They don't like how their bosses treat them. They think certain things are uncruel, but it's always the people they blame it on is always somehow like immigrants or gay people.
Yeah.
It's like they're so close to the actual problem and they
Well,
recognize that these people are bad or women. It's just like it's an easy target to blame. It's like I think the main issue is kind of like trying to switch the perspective of um these people essentially by trying to divert away from making it, I guess, a cultural issue because at the end of the day leftist and right fight things culture war because right wingers come in with culture war issues and then the left also combats it with this. And I think the main problem with this is it does distract from the fact that it is a class war and trying to
yeah.
um, change the mind of these individuals. I think that should be one of like the main leading steps because they're so close. They're always really close.
They are. I think Trump's very good at that, tapping into that working class anger. But his conclusions are always weird, right? Like his conclusion he's very good at like you're fucked over. America's going to shit. Everybody's losing their workers' rights, you know. But his conclusions are always it's Mexicans, it's Muslims, it's women, it's Antifa, it's the woke culture. Michael Prenti, I don't know if you've ever read Michael Parenti, he has this really great essay called Every Word But the C Word, right? And basically what he said was that in liberal society, they want you to think of every single word like gay, trans, whatever, migrant, except for the class word. The class word is a very dirty word, and they don't want you to realize that this is all just the class struggle between the rich and the poor, the proletarian and the bourgeois. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and migrants have become the new scapegoat, I think, in amazing fashion, right? I don't think we've ever seen it's to a scale that is just so shocking. Of course, with like neoliberalism, we had free movement, right? And what free movement basically was brain drain from colonized, neo-colonized countries whose economies are shit because of IMF World Bank loans to these other countries that were in the imperial core, and these people came here and boosted these economies. And then once the rich were done, squeezing every single dollar they could out of these migrants, either migrants that were picking fruit or crops, like Mexican migrants in America, or doctors or something like that, like so many Chinese and Indian or whatever are in America or the West. Then they pointed the finger at them. So the rich are very smart. They got their money's worth from migrants, from these countries that they destroyed, and then they pointed the finger at them like you're that's the reason why you're poor. That's the reason why everything's fucked. It's their minds are amazing. If you want to pick up
Yeah.
those threads.
It's absolutely insane. And I think it's also super easy to neglect how actually it's the complete opposite and how immigrants and migrants are actually the essence of almost every economy. Migration is important. Immigration or immigrants are really essential to every economy. Look at like what DeSantis did, for example, when I don't remember what he did, but he essentially removed a lot of migrant workers from working in Florida and banned, I guess, those without documents or documentation to be able to work in different fields in Florida. And then there was a huge shortage of food and huge shortage of people who wanted to work because they're not taking people's jobs. They're just taking the jobs that most other people don't want to take.
Yeah. Yeah, they because they don't have legal citizenship, the rich are able to just squeeze every single last dollar they can out of them under the threat of constantly deporting them. And my grandfather, he didn't own a farm. He like leased a small plot of land. He even experienced this where he owned a small plot of land. He would grow grapes and he would break even. He just loves farming. He's a longtime farmer, so it was just something that was out of passion. And when Trump came and passed a bunch of migrant bills and scared a lot of migrants, he lost his farm. He lost whatever land he had. He became depressed. He hurt because no citizen wants to pick grapes out in heat. Only my grandpa and like his fellow my grandpa also used to be a fruit picker, an illegal migrant. Only him and like other illegal migrants want to pick fruit out of desperation or things like that. Like in so he ended up losing his small plot of land, and that's that. And so it's funny how to see like Germans, for example, saying like we need to get rid of migrants when these very same Germans' lifestyles are basically funded by low skilled workers or no,
Yeah,
low paid workers.
yeah, and they build almost like their entire culture around it, whether it comes to, for example, when they go out night for fast food, it's
Mhm.
the Turkish places that are open, the Arabic places that are open, like run by Muslim individuals. And they integrated like the doner kebab into such an integral part of their culture that it's inseparable.
Yeah.
And then they want to complain about them as well coming to their country for no other reason because maybe they're being violent towards certain people. Maybe they're being um what's it called? Disrespecting a certain part of it. But I think this also ideology is very misconstrued because at the same time it's like, sure, I get it. They do commit there is more statistics to back up that they do commit more crime, but statistics aren't just everything. There's a reason why like who are the statistics created by, essentially. If a officer decides to arrest uh, a Muslim person or prosecute a Muslim person, it's more likely. He's more likely to just stop by someone who is Muslim, and that is backed up by data. Muslims are more likely to get checked, or people who are wearing hijabs, for example, are more likely to get checked, uh, randomly checked by the police than white people are. So, of course, they're going to be a higher statistical uh, um, factor. They're going to be a lot higher when it comes to the crime rates. And moreover, it's also you're not considering the fact that why are they committing crime? Maybe because your companies don't want to hire them. They read a name, hire that person. And therefore, they're more likely to grow up in poverty, more likely to live a life of poverty, and more likely to commit crime because you're not giving them equal economic opportunities within the society. You're still rejecting them. You're still treating them like outcasts. And by chance they do commit some crime, it's a really easy person to just blame.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, white supremacy offers a very bad solution to poverty, to exploitation, because it basically keeps the system of capitalism around. It just changes its exploitation of people of color more, gives white people a little bit better of a token of it. But in reality, white people, everybody, we're not going to be liberated until we end the system of capitalism, until everybody's liberated. And when the Europeans realize that they have a lot more in common with that poor migrant than they do their rich man, than with their billionaire, that's when people are gonna get truly liberated, and I think that's such a hard thing for them to connect, that their biggest enemy is not a poor migrant who is working for pennies at, I don't know what they have in Europe, like Jamba Juice or, like, smoothie shops, or, like, a
Yeah,
tire factory. Their biggest enemy is the billionaire who is exploiting everybody equally, and exploits this migrant a little bit more, and then after he's done with them, blames that migrant for all of his issues, all the issues that he causes you by making you poor, and
yeah,
it's but I think it's very hard for people to connect the dots, especially um whiteness is sort of like the world's greatest welfare project in a way. Like
yeah,
it's the most artificially subsidized lifestyle and race in probably a long history of humanity. And when you
mhm,
have so much to lose, and when you're slowly losing your rights, you'd rather hold on to that white supremacy than change the system. I think that's the hard disconnect for a lot of people.
yeah. I mean, it's literally ingrained. It's generation after generational wealth that accumulates over a lifetime, and it's just they would stop at nothing from preventing that. And it's interesting to see they might evolve to take different shapes. You know, capitalism isn't the same capitalism that existed 100 years ago or 200 years ago. You know, it constantly changes. And now, especially after like, the 70s with Reaganism, that also changed entirely the idea of capitalism and neoliberalism, I guess you want to say. And I think now it's a very terrible moment for capitalists in the entire world, you know? Um, it's like they're pumping so much money into this would be very probable recession that's going to hit, and like a lot of people aren't being able to afford a lot of things, and they're not getting a lot of jobs, and it's escalating to a point where it's not entirely sustainable to run. So now they have a choice. They have to either accept a new system or just simply change the way in which capitalism looks.
Yeah. And it's painful. It's painful. Uh,
Yeah.
there's really funny stories about British soldiers in when Israel was first being set up, and the British soldiers are complaining about how selfish the Israelis are and how annoying they are. You know, like they're killing Palestinians and giving the Israelis land, and the Israelis are still constantly complaining, constantly saying, you know, I want this, I want that. It's like spoiled child syndrome. And I think whiteness, to an extent, is currently experiencing its spoiled child syndrome, where it's losing a lot of the historical rights and benefits that it had from colonialism, from a really robust welfare state built at the hands and graves of millions in Africa, Latin America, Middle East, Asia, whether, you know, directly through colonialism or neo-imperialism, whatever you want to call it, or neocolonialism, imperialism, all those. And so they're slowly losing everything that's been sort of handed to them by this colonial state apparatus, and they're sort of throwing a tantrum. And that tantrum is white supremacy, it's Nazism, and it's based in very real factors. They are definitely, there's so many people who are on the verge of poverty, barely able to feed their families, especially in, say, the United Kingdom. But what is their answer? Their answer is to burn down a mosque, right? There, which very recently happened with a violent mob. It's not to unite migrants and fight the billionaires that are making them poor.
No. And it's just sad because you can just constantly look at back at history and how in every single instance, a minority is always used as a scapegoat for economic problems.
Yeah.
And it's kind of very similar. Like now it's a bit scary. And the reason I think now it's getting a bit more intense is because there is a lot more economic problems around the world. Prices are ludicrously insane wherever you go. I currently live in Cyprus, where the minimum wage is €5 an hour, which is around $6, six something dollars an hour. And renting in like a capital area would cost you around like 1,000 minimum euros a month, which is unaffordable on a minimum wage. And it's getting more and more and more expensive. And I think in all of these situations, the same thing that it happened in Germany with the rise of, the Nazis, it's happening all over again, but with migrants, a different kind of scapegoat. And I think it's just gonna be constantly repeating itself. And I think that's the scariest part about also the economic system that exists.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, in a very funny way, Muslims and Arabs have sort of become the new, Jews. Like they've sort of filled that place in the European and Western conception that Jews once filled about this great replacement. What did great replacement theory originally, originate with? It was Nazis afraid of, Jews diluting, European, bloodstock. And, you know, still there is some anti-Semitic, undertones to the great replacement theory, anti-Jewish undertones where they're all like, um, it's sort of implied that the Jews are controlling levers of power and allowing in Arab and Muslim migrants so that they can replace Europe, but it's said less directly so, and that onus is more on Arabs. A lot of these talking points have been so normalized where Arabs are savages, they're rapists, they're constantly killing gay people, they're constantly oppressing their women, where it's suddenly okay to kill Palestinians in mass because it's just normalized, you know, and even I think it's normalized amongst liberals, like the quote unquote left, the mainstream left even normalizes this because they're just as racist as the right. They just position
Yep.
themselves as false progressive, whatever.
I mean, watch any 2000s movie, 2000s comedy movie, Family Guy, any of these shows. Just look at like any gag that is referenced to an Arabic person or someone who is Arab. It's all just like such a characterized just evil person that exists to be evil. And like for many parts, even when like you would say these movies that were by liberal actors or leftist, self-claiming actors, actresses, there still were a lot of racist undertones. When people think like, oh, this generation is becoming too soft, then you just watch a movie from the 90s and you completely understand because they were completely unhinged in everything, not just Arabs, but like trans women, gay men, uh, everything like that is just completely unhinged. And then they grow up and they, of course, you start associating Arabs with the things you saw in the movie. You watched American Sniper, and then you can have a clear distinction in your head between who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Every time you see an Arab on screen, it's like violent. Even now, growing up in Cyprus, after I moved from Jordan to Cyprus when I was younger, it's just like all the jokes are about like, oh, explosions, boom. So like, why? Why is this like your association with this region? I think that's why it just becomes so normalized for everything.
It's also a very colonial white man's burden sort of thing. Like we got to save the Arab woman, and of course, what that means is bombing the Arab woman, right?
That's how they save them.
Like we got to save gay people within the Middle East and give them progressiveness, and then of course that means bombing said gay people. Like it's this very twist logic where like you liberate people through bombing the ever loving shit out of them, and of course it's the fact that we live in a material world. That ideology is simply just a justification for material needs, and the material needs of the capitalist West is oil assets, is mineral assets, and so they need these assets within the Arab countries. And so they'll say ideologically this bullshit about we're spreading freedom, we're liberating women, we're liberating gay people. And in reality, it's just bombing the ever living shit out of poor people and
Yeah,
communities. It's things like that.
that's the entire reason of Israel's existence. They knew how important of a strategic location that Israel is. They have like they have their right access to the Suez Canal. They're right within this region
Yeah.
where, like, our new oil companies are booming in Saudi Arabia. They're booming in like Iraq. They're booming in these regions. We need to have like an unbacked strategic ally in this region who can help us influence the politics within this area.
And
And I think that's why a lot of people currently confuse these days. It's just like, oh, Israel is the one who controls the United States. But no, it's actually all a part of their own capitalistic interests within the region. It's just to maintain that. And through that, Israel is a proxy. It doesn't matter what they do, they're
mm,
one of their most important allies
it's,
within the region.
it's America's 51st state, basically. Yeah. And America says like
Exactly.
it's doing it out of the love for the Jewish people. America doesn't give a fuck about Jewish people. It just gives a fuck about having an influence with point within the Middle East to keep its enemies in check. Syria, Hezbollah, Iran. And America used to have Iran under its control under the Shah. And then after it lost Iran, Israel was pretty much its only direct control. Like it does have really good relations with, say, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is obviously moving away a little bit. It's still flaky. It has good
Yeah, that's what I mean.
relationships with Egypt, but it didn't always. The one that it has direct control of is Israel. Like that's the one it has direct control of, and America needs an influence point to control keep its assets in check because oil is so important to the capitalist machine. Pretty much, everything runs off of oil. Like even if we went green, we would still need so much machinery running off of oil. And so it drives the capitalist world. It is the basis of the capitalist world. It is the fuel for the engine of the capitalist world itself. And so we cannot give up our point within the Middle East. Pretty much.
Yeah, and I think that's what drives me insane. It's just like trying to pretend it as if it's what's it called, um, an issue between for Jewish people and for Jewish people's sake. If you cared about Jewish people, then like take care of the Nazis that are literally marching across your streets and marching across in like
Exactly.
look at your own police. Remember how like when Marjorie Taylor Greene said this thing about Jewish people controlling lasers, or like shooting lasers, and that's what kind of caused 9/11, some crazy conspiracy shit that involved Jewish people and lasers. And then like she was fine for that. Maybe she like got kicked off one committee or something, but she was mostly fine. And then you had like Rashida Tlaib or Ilan Omar who said something about APAC, and then she immediately got suspended, or like not suspended. She got like kicked out of her committees. I have no idea, but like she faced a lot harsher repercussions than Marjorie Taylor Greene for saying like actual anti-Semitic, um, you know,
Shit.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most insane one was when Rashida Tlaib said, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and all of Congress literally condemned that act. Like they had to officially pass an act saying, we condemn that phrase and we will not allow it to be used in Congress again. And you're absolutely right. There are so many neo-Nazi organizations within America that are just allowed to exist. And the police are infiltrated by the KKK, are infiltrated by neo-Nazi groups, are infiltrated by white supremacist groups in LA, which is not that far away from where I live. There's police gangs that every time they kill like a Latino person, they tattoo. It's sort of like a weird ritual they have where they will
Really?
yeah, they'll get a tattoo, like a special tattoo to mark every single, Mexican that they kill or black person that they kill, and it's a well-known secret. Like, everybody's known about it for years, but nobody's purged the police. Nobody's purged our society of these white supremacist groups or like the KKK. They're allowed to exist, but for some reason, we're anti-Semitic. I right. Well, no, 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 we're against anti-Semitism. We're for the Jewish people. Like, no, no, we're just for oil. Um you were talking about, moving from Jordan to Cyprus. Just for, like, anybody from the West who doesn't understand, like, what is Jordan? What are the Jordanian people? Like, are you guys the same as Palestinians? Because Israel wants us to think you guys sort of are.
Yeah, I think like this is also trying a big tactic they're used by Israel to kind of also differentiate or put separate in Arabs. They're trying to put a specific meaning or distinction to the Palestinian identity or what it means to even be Palestinian.
Yeah.
So they can claim that they are either the true, you know, people of this land, not the Palestinians, because the name Palestine doesn't exist or something like that. But that doesn't negate from the fact that like there was no borders within like the Swana region. There wasn't a Jordan, there wasn't a Palestine, there wasn't like a Syria. It was just like mainly this region filled with different tribes, and there were native people that did exist there. People used to go freely from Syria to Jordan, and it didn't really matter, you know, because it was also part of the Ottoman occupation.
Mhm.
But regardless, like my family originally moved from Syria to Jordan like 300 years ago, and you can track my lineage in that sort of thing. And it's just like I might be Jordanian, but at the same time, it's like, what is Jordan? It's just a made up name by the British telling us, like, oh, people who live in this weirdly drawn border is Jordan. People who live in this weirdly drawn border is Syria. This is Iraq. Why is the French controlling there? Don't worry about it.
Right.
It's, we're not doing this to see who gets what part of who. You are a country and we support you. And that's it. Like literally the tip of Jordan was drawn in a way. It's a very specific tip. If you look at the map of Jordan, you'll see it. It's done this way because the guy liked the shape. And it's just like he wanted to kind of create a mouth. Is it? And for some reason, if you live a little bit there, you're not Jordanian. But if you live a little bit there, you are Jordanian. And I think when they want to say like Palestinians are Jordanians, it's like, sure, we all connect essentially the same bloodline to a certain degree. But at the end of the day, they're still the native people that lived there thousands of years ago, whether it was, you know, under Palestine, whether it was under like which tribe control. They were just the same people that were living here as they currently are today. And I think like, you know, while I do think these identities are important in today's world because they made it important, but regardless, I think that's my idea of like, what does it mean to be Jordanian at least?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. These colonial borders are so fucked up. But it also kind of reminds me of when America was like doing the Trail of Tears and they were like exporting the Cherokee. Their sort of logic was, oh yeah, they'll just go ahead and live with the other Indians. Like they're basically the same thing, aren't they? Like this it's this inability to recognize that the Middle East is so diverse. Like from Morocco to Iraq, there's this it's this strip of land that's I think longer than Europe. It might be, it might not be, but it's this incredibly diverse place. In We're able to distinguish like France from Belgium to Germany, but we're unable to distinguish like Morocco from Iraq. Like we just sort of think of this place as one amalgamous blob within the West, which is insane.
No, exactly. Look what happened with Kurdistan. Like trying, like they did never gave Kurdistan a country, and they're like, okay, some Kurdish people live in Syria, some Kurdish people live in Iran, some Kurdish people live in Iraq, some Kurdish people like live in Turkey. Good luck. Do best of luck to all of you.
Uh, the colonial headaches, the colonial my family has that own, experience where, like, when they were separating, Punjab or, India from Pakistan, they just
Yeah,
arbitrarily drew that line, and they were like, "Okay, Muslims on this side, Sikhs and Hindus on that side." And then like my grandparents would like have had to travel like thousands of miles on foot just because some British guy arbitrarily who had never been there arbitrarily drew the line. Like just because he felt that it was nice. You know,
Yeah.
it's insane.
It's like they always procrastinated, like to drawing the borders. It's like they forgot, like, oh shit, I have to draw the borders today. Quickly zigzag up down. All right, you're a country next, and they just go on from country to country, just lazily drawing everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it should be mentioned that these borders have been drawn to benefit Europe, right? To like get the ethnic groups to play off of each other, to weaken these regions. Like I've heard some African nationalists sort of describe Africa as basically balkanized on purpose. Like the borders of Africa have been drawn purposely for Europeans to be able to play these ethnicities off of each other so that they're always in competition with each other and Europe always gets the best deal through like IMF loans or whatever like that, and also to make it harder for Africa to develop on its own. And I think
Yeah, I mean that's
same thing. Very similar.
yeah.
Very similar.
I think it's because like they know the fact that um the Africa and also the Middle East or Swana or whatever was able to, given their own time and people and space to prosper, then they would become by far the richest countries in the world and disrupt the current hegemony that Europe and the West has.
Ab-
Because they know they have a lot more resources, a lot more people, a lot more what's it called? Just everything than they do. Like the Congo alone has like what, 11 trillion or some crazy amount like that, by far making it the most rich resource country in the entire world. But it's not, because if they gave it time, then they would literally disrupt everything. It's also the same with what they tried to do with Gaddafi. Gaddafi tried to, uh, create a Pan-African um, image, unite Africa at the same time, and then they started going against them. I'm not saying like Gaddafi was the greatest of people, because by far, I don't like just supporting a certain side because the person I or the hegemony that I like that I dislikes them. Because the United States is against Gaddafi doesn't mean I have to be pro him. But regardless, they still attacked Gaddafi and ended up killing Gaddafi because he wanted to unite the African uh, continent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He set a very dangerous precedent that America didn't want the rest of Africa following. And Gaddafi and Thomas Sankara and Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba and, Nkrumah, they all set these dangerous precedents that Africa, in fact, can be the most powerful continent on earth, that if to develop on their own, they will overtake us. And it's not even that these places don't want to trade with Europe. It's not even that they don't want to exchange products, and it's not even that we don't want each other to be wealthy, right? Like it's just that they want these things as cheaply as possible, right? And it's we want these resources as cheaply as possible. We don't want these people getting any cent of that. We want every single penny going towards our billionaires. That's the thing. That's the thing. Because Africa would be more than happy to continue trading just at better rates for itself. Cuba, all these places, pretty much.
hmm hmm And I think that's what's kind of currently happening. There's this. I'm very bad with the kind of the specifics in it, but one of France's colonies who exports chocolate, I think Ivory Coast
Hmm.
or Guinea, one of them, I think the EU was essentially, or like companies within Europe were essentially having like, I think 70-30% share, or maybe 70-10, like, sorry, 90-10, like a ridiculous amount that favors Europe when it comes to the term of like the profits they make from chocolate.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, they reached a point where the European Union is kind of imposing like these green caps on certain companies. And I think while these things might be, I guess, logical for companies in Europe where they can actually build sustainable infrastructure and industries and be able to lower their caps, it's not possible in like this specific country and in many regions within Africa.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they can't pay this, they're charged with a fine of like 200 million. And because of that, they now like can't make any money because of that. And then all of a sudden they decided that they want to take control of their own chocolate industries and chocolate productions within the country, completely cutting off Europe. And this caused a huge disruption for the supplies of chocolate around Belgium and Europe
Yeah.
to a large amount. And we're seeing this change like slowly happening within different ex-colonist states in Africa and the Middle East. They're starting to go further away, try to detach themselves from the West. And I think China is also playing an important part in that.
Yeah, well, we cannot discount China. China has created such an amazing, you can I have criticisms with China. Everybody has criticisms with China. I think there's a single person that doesn't criticize China. It has a lot of problems, but it has created this beautiful alternative to the current mode of politics, which is the IMF and the World Bank comes in. We strip you of every single fucking worker's rights. We debt entrap you to hell. We make you default on those fucking loans. We seize your assets and we privatize, get rid of your borders. We force your country to like become so poor that a bunch of your brainiacs, right, your pharmacists, your doctors that you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training, right? Like the Philippines currently is basically America's neo colony, and the Philippines spends millions of dollars every single year training its nurses. And all of those nurses come to America to work because they can't pay their nurses well in the Philippines. Um, and China basically says, you can continue having like your system in place. We're just going to give you better loans, right? We're just going to give you better
Yeah.
deals that favor you. And that's just such a beautiful alternative to the current mode of politics that allows for liberation struggles. Like the Sahel region of Africa has been able to free itself with Russian and Chinese help, basically.
Yeah, and I don't know, like if anyone like listening to this disagrees with this, like Bloomberg, like the most liberal, one of the most liberal news stations in the world, wrote the same thing. They're talking about how like no, China isn't um exploiting these like isn't creating a bank trap for these African nations and taking all their money through debt. It's not what is actually happening, regardless of what people want to believe. What they're actually creating, you know, a
It's
lot better
crazy.
infrastructure, a lot better opportunities. And I think in 100 years, like the world's gonna, maybe 50 years, the world's gonna look drastically different with Africa rising to almost like one of the most dominant economic forces out there.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's with the help of China, of course, and moving up Europe. And it's crazy that America accuses China of debt entrapment when China forgives loans and America doesn't. What America does is it traps or the IMF, which is sort of this international beast of its own, but have very heavily control enmeshed within the American foreign policy. What they do is they debt entrap these countries. These countries are entrapped in debt. The second they default on them, America comes in and privatizes everything, gets rid of every single fucking worker's rights, and this sometimes even means taxes, like what we're seeing in the Kenyan protests right now. William Ruto, the president who's IMF backed, the America's darling. American state makers have, of course, moved a little bit back from him as he's violently cracked down on protesters. But he was America's darling until these protests started. He was even attempting to tax poor people within Kenya, small businesses, average people at a time where they can't afford shit because of inflation. And that was IMF supported. So it is taxes for poor people, but it's privatizing everything else, getting rid of rights for everybody else. It's insane. It's insane.
Mhm. I'm just curious as to what you think, or if you think that a lot of what is currently happening in the world right now, whether it's in Kenya, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in America, a lot of,
Yeah.
or like, a lot of protests, a lot of like near revolution, not, I wouldn't say revolutions per se, but like coups and civil unrests within most places in the world. Do you think there is anything significant about that, or do you think which will lead to anything significant?
Yeah, I think we're definitely watching world capitalism enter a new phase because after 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet bloc, where a lot of countries could sort of rely on the Soviets as an alternative, we basically experienced, let's see, from 1990 to 2024, that would be 30 years about. We basically experienced 30 years of America grab a unipolar grip onto the world, right? Capitalism and this neoliberal mode of production basically eroded all borders. basically eroded all states, basically eroded all workers' rights, and created these multinational companies that didn't have borders that penetrated almost every single country, right? Capitalism reached its grasp as far as it could. It extended itself as far as it could. And the neoliberal world promised a lot of things to us. It promised a world without war. It promised us a world without poverty. It promised a world where trickle down economics is going to be so amazing. It promised us a world, free migration is this amazing thing. And of course, this isn't to say that migrants are bad or anything, but it was done out of impoverishing countries and causing massive brain drain. And so it was great for multinationals. They love that. So we were promised this utopia, and we were witnessing that utopia sort of implode on itself, right? Its own contradictions, because every promise it had was built on cracking down on workers' rights. It was built on war. It was built on genocides in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's been unable to deliver on its promises. And we're entering a new phase, especially with China rising. China has offered an alternative, and China, this new bloc, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I most definitely think so as well. I think a lot of the currents that are currently being started today is one of the first or earliest indicators of um, the big R word, revolution
Yeah.
in that sort of sense. Because I did study revolutions in university. I did like a minor in it essentially. And kind of when people want to talk revolution, I think everyone has just a current construct of what revolution is without recognizing the fact that revolution or the idea of what a revolution is constantly evolves and changes throughout time.
Yep.
It's something that is very contextual. It has a very similar essence, but it's very different. I mean, a lot of scholars are still debating as to what exactly a revolution is and what a revolution means. From like Charles Tilly to Skadeš Koppel, they all have their own interpretation of revolutions, but like you can't predict it. And I think a lot of people are discounting what is currently happening right now because they have, I guess, a specific idea of what a revolution is, kind of just storming the Capitol, kicking everybody off, putting, guillotine, that sort of things, Russian Revolution style, just storm uh, the main hall and then they'll see it's like they forget the fact that the French Revolution, even though took like 9 years, there were like three separate parts of the French Revolution. Like it's a long process. It doesn't just happen overnight. And what we are currently seeing, even with what happened with, I guess, the Palestinian protests, the BLM protests, a lot of this current civil unrest is kind of only the beginning. And I think people think that the economic situation right now is worse, is bad. It's going to get worse. It's going to continuously and gradually get more worse. And I think everyone has a breaking point. No matter what people's political ideologies are, no matter what people's political beliefs are, there is going to be a breaking point
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
And I think we're currently
No, go.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying like we currently are, you know, heading slowly into that breaking point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we traditionally conceptualize as revolution is usually built off of like a long lineage, like even the Russian Revolution. There were so many it was built off of so many anti-czarist attempts, the Narodniks, things like that. Like it was a long history of people standing up against the czar that eventually culminated in the Russian Revolution. So all revolutions stand on the shoulders of past movements. And revolution, that conceptualization of revolution that we have is basically, I believe, only happens when the system does not work anymore. Like when it's absolutely shit the fan, when everybody cannot ignore the contradictions of it anymore. For example, late Tsarist Russia, everybody's fucking dying because of World War I, because of shortages, because of things like that. The French Revolution, there's famines. Everybody cannot ignore the issues of the nobility anymore. And neoliberalism,
Yeah.
this neoliberal world order, we're slowly sort of like it still works for enough people that it can keep on chugging along, but slowly but surely as the middle class dies within Europe and America, as the contradictions of capitalism, we're getting rid of workers' rights, the massive amounts of wealth inequality, both internally within America and globally. The fact that 8 Americans own as much wealth as half of all of humanity, which is insane. As these contradictions become to a point where we can't ignore it anymore, and even the lay person can't ignore it anymore, that's when shit gets revolutionary. And we're slowly inching towards that. I can't say if it's going to happen in our lifetimes, but we are definitely
Yeah.
to that mode.
Mhm. There's something I want to pick up on that, and I don't know if you would necessarily agree on it, but looking into, for example, the current problems that did exist and like from what we can compare back then and back now. And I want to say that essentially feudalism, oligarchies, aristocracies, kind of, this idea of feudalism never really ended. The aristocrats might have moved away, but the mode of power and control shifted into the hands of the capitalists instead. And they are currently the new feudalistic overlords that do have the most power, and they are essentially the same. Have you watched Succession?
No, I haven't.
I mean, what I'm about to say, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but essentially in the show, they do highlight a lot of excellent points, which is showing you how the current. By the way, for context, Succession is about a show of ultra wealthy billionaires, and the guy is meant to be a Rupert Murdoch kind of figure for right wing propaganda and everything like that. But, anyways, what's interesting about the show is that it does bring up a great comparison of how their role in life and how everything functioned is essentially exactly like a monarchy was or works. The entire plot of the show is who is going to succeed this CEO, and it comes down to heritage. And there's a lot of points like why like the prince would soon become king, or the eldest boy of the king would soon become, the leader of the country. It's the same thing with the CEO position, and it's just choosing between your children. Everyone that works within, or like the closest and most powerful people within the company are related to the CEO. There's a lot of you know, what's the word that I'm looking for? Um,
Uh, shit. Nepotism. Nepotism.
Nepotism, exactly. There's a lot of nepotism that exists within it. And these people have an insanely tremendous control over politics. They have, there's a scene where like they're all in a room trying to decide who's the next president and ultimately has the most control. Like these people control the world's prices, controls the news that goes around. They have very rich and powerful people on top that you can't vote for, by the way.
Absolutely.
Um, exactly. And I think like people need to realize like the same way we overthrew um the well in a lot of places the aristocracies, the monarchies, and we gained the ability for quote unquote democracy because now we can vote who is the leader in power. We're still missing that part of like the working class not being able to vote for who, for example, leads their company, or the entire idea that when you are a conglomerate that is like a business, like Amazon is essentially a country with the wealth that it has. I do believe that they have so much insane control and influence around the world. Tesla, or Elon Musk's company. Elon Musk is essential to the government because of his satellites. And at the end of the day, no one votes for him. He just gets to be the CEO, and he could choose his next CEO. It could be his child, it could be his like best friend. And it continues this system of exploitation. And I think people need to understand that one of the main parts or beginning parts to actually end the system of capitalism is making sure that you are able to have more say within your company and within where you are currently working.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's very hard to recognize. Capitalism is very good at hiding its violence, right? Like violence systemic. Its undemocratic processes become systemic and not so direct. But what we really are living in is Americans' conceptions of like that communist dictatorship, 1984-esque, like all those horrible things. Every single company is basically its own dictatorship, right? And the CEO and the private owners of the company control your life, control what you wear, control whether or not you have food on your table, control just basic things like that. They even spy on you sometimes if you're like a truck driver or like an Amazon dude, or they control whether or not you can pee or not if you're an Amazon package person.
A lot of Amazon.
Yeah, a lot of Amazon, but that's the obviously that's the that comes to mind, but it's a dictatorship that she can't recognize as a dictatorship, basically, which is insane.
Yeah, that's what I think is like the whole illusion of democracy idea of people think that they have, because now the capitalists are intertwined with the state itself. Like the Democrats and Republicans, they both serve the interests of the capitalists, serve the interests of the richest of the rich, the top class, the wealthy and powerful.
Yeah,
And that's why it doesn't matter voting Democrat, voting Republican. It's kind of like a interesting illusion that you have, because at the end of the day it's you're still voting kind of for like, oh, do I want these companies be able to say what works in life, or do I want these companies
yeah.
to have a say in my life?
Sometimes it's the same company. I mean, sometimes it's different company. Like the Democrats are obviously more controlled by like a very Silicon Valley esque rich, and then the Republicans very much like a rural oil rich. But sometimes the same billionaire would just donate to both of them, and yeah, it's insane. I mean, the illusions of democracy are even going away. Like nobody fucking voted for Kamala Harris. Which is crazy. She was completely unpopular in the primary. She simply just got chosen as Joe Biden's running mate. So we might possibly have like 8 years of a woman that absolutely nobody chose. Um, Crazy. I just want to ask you though, like from Cyprus, what does this mess in America look like? Like this Israel genocide, just this mess that are politics. Like, what does it look like from the outside? Just Americanism right now.
Yeah, like I haven't been to America. Like last time I was in America, I was like 9. So
Yeah.
not a great idea of Americans. Besides my American friends in my personal life, but um, from the outside perspective to us, especially to someone who's Jordanian, it's kind of like it's deja vu, because it's like the same experiences that we have been seeing and we have been experiencing for such a long time.
Yeah.
And it's just so frustrating seeing America react almost literally the exact same way in a lot of sense, especially like liberal leftists, or the way that they were talking about it. If we remember during the Iraq war, if you would question the Iraq war or talk negatively about the war, even like these people at the Oscars or like these leftist celebrities were like in shock. But in today's age, it's so completely okay to condemn the Iraq war. And I think we're seeing the same thing happening today. It's just like it always feels like a large portion of the group is not keeping up. I mean, you're repeating essentially the same mistake. The same anti Muslim sentiment that exists now is very similar to how it was post 9/11. I was one, I didn't remember much, but from what I know, people have told me, it's pretty much the kind of exact same thing. And I have no idea. It's just frustrating to see like why isn't a lot of people been able to pick up the patterns. I do think it has really changed a lot. However, I think like what I'm seeing currently with Palestine is something that I've never seen in my life.
Uh huh.
Never ever seen before. Like my dad, who's like, li- born in the 50s, lived through multiple wars, fought in one of these wars, as an Air Force pilot. Um, he would never imagine, for example, that there would be protests this size happening in America, or, but I don't know. I don't know how, at the end of the day, how much like different protests are going to amount to if at the end of the day you're still going to be voting for someone like Kamala Harris and continuing essentially the same mistakes that you keep doing in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a little bit of hope in America in that Gen Z and like so many young people are so informed thanks to the internet and things like that. Like whereas like in the Iraq war, which also saw some of the biggest protests, anti-war protests in America, but not to this scale. Like not to this scale. The only source of news that people could get was pretty much cable news. And so that was a very controlled state narrative about WMDs and yada yada yada. Whereas with the explosion of the internet, people are able to like, hey, maybe that Israeli strike in the Golan Heights was from Israel and not from Hezbollah. Like we're able to create counter hegemons, counter narratives to the
Yeah.
one. But I think also we're sort of having to contend with the fact that this is a dictatorship. Because everybody has pretty much exhausted every single democratic mean to stop this genocide. It's local city councils, it's pestering our representatives, it's calling them, it's going into the halls of Congress, it's protests, and the genocide still hasn't stopped. And so I think both these protests are, on one hand, amazing, and I'm not saying don't stop them. Like absolutely put the gas on the pedal.
Yeah.
But also, they're revealing how undemocratic of a society America is, who it is truly ruled by. And it's also revealing the limitations of the American left, which is a sort of a false left and unable to conceptualize a world beyond the Republican Democrat binary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when people talk about it's essentially all the same arguments trying to talk about Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, a third party isn't going to win. Well, if like enough of you, like most of you say that. So if enough of you got together and like organized and said, like, you know what, maybe she's not enough. Maybe together we can vote for someone else and rally behind them, then they'd have a chance. Or maybe just do anything else. Like I get it. I'm truly like, I'm not American. And I think like I try to kind of watch at the end of the day what I say because I'm not going to be suffering the consequences, all of the consequences of, let's say, a Trump presidency. I don't know what it's like to live under a Trump presidency, and I don't know what it's like to live under, a Joe Biden or Democrats presidency at the end of the day. So, like, I'm not gonna shout at someone for wanting to vote for like Kamala Harris or whatever like that because it's your country at the end of the day. But regardless of the situation, if you think like you're just voting and changing, it's like, what else are you doing besides voting? Why aren't you at least building up certain candidates, third party candidates for maybe Congress or for maybe, longer shots, the Senate? Why does it always have to be, for example, presidential? I think they always put everything on the presidential level and kind of ignore everything else.
Yeah.
Because even if there's like a small party of like small amount of members in a third party in Congress, they could still have like such an important influence within state policy. Because you know how you saw like this the freedom movement or the freedom cabinets in the United States, how much influence they had over the Republican Party, you know? And that was just 11 people or like 17, and they can have an enormous influence. So I think if enough people rallied, organized, and started, for example, trying to push a certain candidate for their congressional district that is from a third party or has different ideals, not all of them are going to win, but enough people are going to win at some point where you can slowly start building up towards maybe having some seats in the Senate or maybe having some seats in your state's Congress or state Senate or, you know, maybe the Senate itself at some point. It's just like build up towards something. You want fundamental change, you also have to work on it. Like voting is essential and voting is important. But at the end of the day, it's not everything that you need to be doing or could be doing. I don't know if you agree.
I mean, I think the dangerous thing is liberals don't want fundamental change. They want comfortability, and I was you were saying like you can't really comment that much on American issues, but you absolutely can because American issues are your issues. American issues are the whole world's issues, right? We've got
No, it's true.
many military bases all around the world. Whatever we vote affects everybody pretty much. Like we are the global hegemon. We are the center of global capitalism, militarism, things like that. So
I mean, climate change as well.
yeah, so like what our issues are Lebanese people's issues, especially in southern Lebanon, and their Palestinians' issues, and their, it's we people in Okinawa's issues, people in South Korea's issues, where like soldiers will like light fireworks, and South Korean people have to like clean up American people's trash. Like it's insane. Um, but yeah, I just think it's it's the inability to imagine a world beyond this, and it's also such a fear-based fear, right? Like Like so many Americans are afraid for their family safeties that they are prioritizing their family safeties over, let's say, Palestinian or Lebanese people's safeties. And that's a fight to have. But I think they're unable to recognize that their families are not going to be fundamentally safe until Lebanese people are free, until Palestinian people are free, until the people of the world are free from American imperialism. Because if the American bourgeois, if Kamala Harris has no issues ripping a baby in Palestine to shreds, that's a human
Yeah.
life. That's a human life. She has no issue with ripping your baby to shreds, your wife to shreds, you to shreds. Um, the, they give as little as a fuck about people in Palestine as they do about you. Right? Like a baby in Palestine is worth nothing less than a baby in America, but they make
No.
seem like it matters a lot more and that these people care about you a lot more. No, they give a fuck about you as much as they do about Palestinians. So the only way for you to get free is to free Palestine, is to free uh um the Black Panthers were very good with this. They were always emphasizing proletarian internationalism. And then the episode before this is going to be an episode where I explore Fred Hampton and his philosophy in life. But Fred Hampton always like black people in America aren't free until the Viet Minh are free, right? And Americans aren't free until the people in Baghdad are free. You know, like Iraq. And that's just so. Wait, is Baghdad in Iraq? Am I being stupid?
Yeah, it is.
I hope I didn't have an American moment, but it's just we are not the working class is interconnected. The citizenship is just an illusion. Nationalism is just an illusion, basically, is what I'm trying.
Mhm. Yeah. It's kind of the same thing which I talked about in one of my videos, essentially how um, what they're currently doing with Palestine and what is currently happening, especially with the student protests and with the protests that are happening just generally because of Palestine. If that were to fail, if everything were to fail, then it puts a certain precedent that, like, oh, for like the rich and for the leaders, that, oh, we can push them this far and we still can get away with it in that sort of sense. So what is happening right now is really important because, like, whether we succeed or fail is going to be able to tell the bourgeoisie um, and the world leaders that, yeah, we can do this. And at the end of the day, you didn't fight hard enough. You will still vote for us
Yeah.
because so why should we change anything? And I think that's what something like a lot of Americans don't consider. It's like, okay, let's say a third party doesn't win, but in the next election, don't you think that this party is going to be able to have to change their stance on a certain topic because otherwise you won't vote for them? Regardless of the matter, because what is happening, a party evolves based on what red line you draw. The reason a lot of people currently have anything that they have is because their previous generation drew a red line and said, no, you can't be doing that. We don't like, fuck with redlining. We don't fuck with apartheid in our country. So they kind of have to. I get it. It's not the full story, but regardless of what I mean, like there is a red line that is drawn constantly, and I think like if people don't draw a red line to the current genocide that is happening and everything that is currently happening, then it's just gonna not change anything in the future.
Exactly. And if genocide is not your red line and you don't stop these politicians on genocide, then that gives them a mile. You give them an inch, they get a mile. And if they recognize that, hey, they're going to fold on genocide against Palestinians, I can fuck over their workers' rights anytime I want.
Yeah,
Like they're not gonna fight that hard. If they can't even fight to stop babies being bombed in hospitals, I can get rid of well, we don't have maternity leave, but whatever maternity leave protections that we do have, I can get rid of them anytime because there's so much of pussies. For lack of a better word, I'm sorry, but there's so much of pussies that they can't even fight against that. They can't fight against me taking away their rights. You know,
no,
it's pretty much.
no, exactly, and like a Republican Party is going to win at some point. Okay, it's like you can't stop it forever. You can't like just vote them out every election. And I said in one of my videos, it's essentially like the Democrats prop up right-wing figures and they prop up fascists. They pay for them directly. And millions of dollars were spent trying to make MAGA Republicans win certain elections because they know they're much easier to defeat than someone who's more moderate or more moderate Republican, whatever you want to call it. They're still racist as fuck, but like they're more moderate. And because you keep voting for the Democrats, they keep will continue with this tactic of propping up right-wing figures. And by the way, it's not just the Democrats, it's also Labour Party um, within the UK, and it's the same thing with the Renaissance Party in France. Like, why did Macron call an election just as the Le Pen's party, her fascist party, won the most seats in like the European Parliament? Because he was hoping for hoping for her to win the parliamentary position of becoming prime minister. And then in 2027, when it's the next French elections, he's hoping people would get sick of her and vote for him instead. So they constantly dangle like these center right parties, like the Democrats, and they dangle this threat of fascism and fear, and hoping that people won't take the bait, hoping that people would just be like, okay, I'll vote for you. It's holding them political hostages at the end of the day, and it's the tactics. Their main tactic is their entire persona at this point.
Yeah. I think one thing that's very frustrating for people outside of the West is that even their news is constantly dominated by the West, right? Like America is sort of like a super culture. Like if Trump does something, it's going to be on Indian news for like 24 hours, even more than like some Indian events, things like that. I know. So like, why do you think like America has sort of become like a world super culture? Why do you think so many people are sort of enmeshed with an American culture? Like, I know, a lot of people actually do sort of like America, like swallow the American pill within the third world a little bit, or the or outside of the West, quote unquote. And why do you think that is? How do you think we can fight that? Just things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know this, but like my uncle, my Arabic uncle, the most Arabic person, Jordanian man you would ever meet, is a bagger Republican, like with his full cart. He supports Trump. I'm like, Man, you in a different country. Like he's acting like he constantly acts like he lives there.
Yeah.
And it's just because like in Jordan, let's say it's ex-colonist state by the British. So in a lot of schools, a lot of people would be extremely fluent in English. Me, for example, like I have such an Americanized accent is because I grew up with a lot of Western cultures around me. You go to Jordan, you'll find a Chuck E. Cheese. And I'm not even exaggerating. Like, why isn't there a Chuck E. Cheese in Jordan? Why is like there
Is it
like
called?
every West huh? It's called Chuck E. Cheese. It's owned by Chuck E. Cheese. It's a Chuck E. Cheese. Which
So it's literally just called Sucker Keys. You guys don't like look at all.
it's like there's Applebee's, there's like you can like we have like, we don't have we have Popeyes, we don't have what's it called?
Gibbs,
Um we have KFC until we don't have Wendy's or like Chick-fil-A yet.
you don't need it.
At, at some point, man, you'll find a one-piece restaurant. And I think like coming from like such a Western culture of everything being Western, like you always watch Western movies of the Avengers. Oh my God, look how awesome it is to be a part of the United States military. Isn't it fucking sick? Don't you want to ride a tank and shoot minorities? It's so fun. Call of Duty, like whole ass missions where you just, go kill this terrorist over there, or oh, go kill this Russian over there. And I think it's just like you become so ingrained with Western culture unintentionally without noticing by constantly participating within, you know, the pop culture and everything that's happening within the West.
Yeah.
Essentially, like there's a reason, like also why I know so much of the United States because it has such a huge influence in my life, regardless of where you are, whether it comes to entertainment, whether it comes to fast foods, whether it comes to, you know, your education. Even in my book, when I was growing up and we were doing history, which is GCSEs, the British system, it's like,
Mm.
oh, look at the Vietnam War and America really kicked their ass, or look at Saddam. They really, no, like it's extremely black and white.
Yeah.
So everything, like unintentionally, grow up with Western values, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think America has both economically dominated the world, but also culturally dominated it in a way where like it spread this American super culture, basically, that's almost globalized. And it really reinforces the capitalist sort of neoliberal system well. If you were able to convince everybody in the world that America is this like awesome, amazing place, they suddenly accept, the American system and America's unsavory actions. They're a little bit easier of a pill to swallow, I would say. You know, it works really well
Yeah,
in America's favor.
yeah. And I mean, like, it's just the same thing with like capitalism and marketing. It's just marketing and like consumerism is such a widespread thing. And ultimately, most of like your consumers' products come from like specific places, mainly the United States. What's your phone? Oh, it's an iPhone. America. What do you use? Google from America. Their algorithms will always favor American. Like, why do I know so much of American pop culture? Why do I know so much of like these American YouTubers? What the fuck is happening in Florida or whatever? Because I slowly started growing up with like these information that do exist.
Yeah, yeah, you can't escape it, and of course, it doesn't
You
go
can't.
both ways. It doesn't go both ways at all. Like most Americans cannot point out fucking Mexico on a map, right? Like the country that
No,
made us. You ask most Americans,
hey, at least Jordan.
they I could go down to my mall right now with a map and ask somebody to point out Jordan, and I think they would point out like Georgia or something like the
Literally all they ask me, oh, like, oh, you're from Georgia. At some point I gave up. I'm like, sure, yeah, I'm from Georgia. What's up?
yeah. Yeah, I also think it's the fact that a lot of these countries are sort of unofficial neo-colonies of America, right? Like, American companies dominate these countries' economics, these countries' investments. A lot of American banks and the IMF and the World Bank are very heavily invested within these countries. And so, along with that economic control comes that cultural control. And America wants to make that pill as easy to swallow, right? That you are not independent, that you are not your own country, and it does that through the culture wars, basically. I think that's
No.
why. Um,
Yeah, and they try to show you, for example, look how great it is in America. They try to highlight this idea that consumerism and like the ability to own certain things is a life worth pursuing. And it shows like that also in the movies to everyone who is like, you know, watching this, let's say in Jordan, in like Mexico, and some like um, you know, on like developing country,
Yeah.
whatever. And they want to aspire to be that. They want to aspire to have this lifestyle. They don't hide that. You go to, they go in America and pursuing of the American dream. It's a constant
advertising point, yeah.
advertising point always. This is like a cliche at this point of like this guy going to America hoping to actualize or realize the American dream by owning a Ferrari and doing coke off a girl's ass because that's what everything needs in life.
That's my American dream, you know.
My American dream.
Haven't achieved it yet, but I will get there, you know. Uh where does Jordan fit into like the American global hegemon, you know, Israel Palestine conflict? Obviously Israel isn't acting alone. It needs allies, and America needs allies within the Middle East. And a lot of these allies currently are sort of like half allies, but they are like Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. Oh, what about Jordan? Where does that fit into this puzzle piece?
Yeah. No, I have to tread carefully on this because like Jordan does like have that serious like they would persecute someone, I sorry, prosecute someone for like speaking negatively about the king specifically or the government.
Right,
I'm gonna choose it. I'm gonna choose my words wisely
got you.
in this. Um but the king essentially himself is um his dad is the king of Jordanian, but his mom is British,
Okay.
and he grew up a lot of part of his life within the UK. He's a very westernized lad, to say the least. And even when he did become king, because it wasn't him that was expected to be king, it was actually one of his brothers.
Mm.
Um, he didn't speak Arabic that well,
Oh,
you know.
that's
And my dad, and like a bit of insider information, because my dad's a pilot and he flew the King of Jordan, his dad and the son, a couple of times.
mm,
And the things that he was telling me about the way he was behaving made sense. He was just such a westernized person to begin with, such connections to the West. He loves going to the United States and gamble casinos all over the United States, which is, mostly Jordanian money, but who knows?
you're right.
Um, and he loves basically the West. Jordan is kind of like an extension. You go to Jordan and like architecturally, it's a look different, but everything you love in America, you will find there. You go to a supermarket, you will find all your favorite cereals, you will find all of your favorite foods, and they just sold off their country so much. And I think most of the industries aren't owned by Jordan. The airports, the main airport in Amman, capital of Jordan, is owned by a French company. Um, the phosphate mining companies, because that's Jordan's most valuable natural resource, is owned also by a foreign company. And it becomes in such a way where the entire country is built to foreign debt and foreign assets. And the JOD, the Jordanian currency, is tied to the dollar. They literally tied it to the dollar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, the economy is so intertwined with Western values and the Western hegemony. And, if the king or if any like people like there try to be, I guess, too critical of Israel, or push a certain boundary or act in a certain boundary, the king can condemn certain actions and he does often condemn certain actions. But at the end of the day, he would still um, allow trading routes to bypass the Houthi blockade.
Yeah.
And he would still trade with Israel. He would still shoot Iranian missile jets, which I'm not saying Iran is good in this situation, but I'm just saying you are still defending you're still defending the state when you shouldn't be defending the state to begin with, especially considering what is happening. And they're not really pushing anything further. They're even arresting protesters at this point because there's half of Jordan, half of Amman are Palestinians, like third generational, second generation. Most of Amman is Palestinians. Most of my friends in Jordan are Palestinians, or have yeah, from either their grandparents, great grandparents, their even maybe their parents. It's like, after the Nakba and after everything that happened, so many Palestinians, especially with the fact that when the West Bank was a part of Jordan, everyone there got a Jordanian citizenship.
Okay. That makes
So like, yeah, there are a lot of protests, and the king was maybe his position was threatened at a certain point because of how serious these protests are getting, but the whole economy is built on the West, and Saudi Arabia is arresting a lot of people who would even criticize the government's role in what's happening or even mention Gaza or Palestine. Like it's illegal to have protests there. And just because, you know, economically they're tied to the West, so they can't break it. And they have to support the current hegemony.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of insane how entire countries just basically exist as sort of proxies of American capital. One very famous example I can think of is like, for example, Taiwan or South Korea. These countries basically are just, or even Japan to some extent, these countries basically are just fronts for American capital and just basically glorified American military bases. And there's this entire nation just created for American capital itself. And obviously, there are like historical, cultural like legitimacies to these countries, like internally, but really they just act as fronts for America itself. Like entire countries, basically the dogs of America, or like it's crazy. And of course, it can't be understated how much Israel and this whole genocide and previous genocides against Palestinians have relied on these Arab states sort of just being fronts for America and supporting America. And the people, like the people on the ground, like Arab people, are very obviously against Israel and what's happening, but these countries' leaders are just sort of middlemen for America, which allows these
Mhm.
genocides to happen and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I also forgot to mention is that Israel also controls Jordan's water,
Oh my God.
and Jordan is in a heavy drought. Um, for example, people can't shower on certain days of the week, or can't use water on certain days of the week because there's such heavy shortages. And since Israel controls it, and they actually, Jordan pays them a lot of money to also buy water from them.
Oh my,
It's like, yeah, it's just like if Israel cuts off the water from Jordan, it's fucked. There's gonna be insane civil unrest within the region.
that's
Uh,
that is insane. That is insane, like oversight in your own sovereignty.
yeah, yeah. And it's just like, what is Jordan at the at the end of the day? Because you go to Jordan, take an Uber ride, you're gonna get a political lecture from the taxi driver explaining to you how shit the situation is in every aspect. And it really is, because I visit Jordan every year, every once in a while. And the way like you're just seeing the amount of like poor people that currently exist, how many like people are just struggling, absolutely struggling on a day-to-day basis. It's crazy, you know, especially after COVID. The economic damage that happened after COVID to Jordan was like unmeasurable because people were taking like um a year off work or however long, quarantines or lockdowns were, and they never compensated them financially. And a lot of people, including my uncle, had to shut down his businesses. You know, he couldn't afford to pay. Like, even if people came to his place, they're like, "Oh, he's not wearing a mask, 500 euro, 500 JD fine,"
Like,
which is around 700 euros.
yeah.
Um, and it's completely screwed over. And I think it's just the same thing that is currently happening with Palestine is kind of pushing the population also very closely to the edge. And the king is trying his best to maintain, this dominance that exists there. And so continuously supporting Western hegemony because he know they're the only thing that is currently keeping him in power.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't wanna get you into too much trouble, but, it is very
Yeah.
similar to, before Egypt was ruled by, Nasser and his coup, the king of Egypt was, like, immensely this is just a historical fact, it's not related, whatever, but, I'm just mentioning this for the fun of it, but, the king of Egypt was, like, immensely hated by the people of Egypt. They did not like him at all, and when, Nasser came to power and they were, like, going through his palace, they found fancy cars and like just piles, rooms full of like nudie magazines, like Playboy, because like you didn't get internet porn back then, so you had to like hoard it all. And it was just sort of like showing the Egyptian people that like we were living in poverty, we were like poor as shit, and our king was spending money on this. Like he was so out of touch with the average person.
Yeah. It's the same thing that happened also in Iran.
Yeah,
Um,
with the
with the Shah after he threw the big ass party. Um, that's what kind of tends to happen. And I just think, I don't know, with what's currently happening, um, in a lot of places, like right now, especially with the escalation in Lebanon, we are just kind of seeing the beginning of something quite really big and a very big shift in also power positions and certain hegemonies that do exist. Because we are living in I don't think a lot of people are truly conceptualizing how much of a historic moment we are living through
absolutely.
for, and it's just wild to watch it on the outside, especially moving out of Jordan now.
I mean, history gets made every week today. It's that Lenin quote. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. We're in the weeks where decades fucking happen. I think lot of it is that the neoliberal world order in which the West controlled everything and had a hegemonic neo-colonial grip on the world was very, very sick. Was very, very sick. Its contradictions were trying to be barely held together, and then COVID came in with this fucking wrecking ball and just the rot, the absolute rot of this system. Like nobody realized how fucking rotting to the core that the system was. And Israel has really exposed that neoliberalism is not that far off from Nazism, right? Like as the entire Western world has coalesced to like bomb this like what like a couple mile strip of land. It's less than the I'm being very Californian right now, but it's less than the distance from Pleasanton to San Francisco. That makes sense to it's not everybody else, but it's just small strip of land, and the entire Western world has put all of their energy and billions of dollars into bombing the ever living shit out of this tiny little place. It just reveals how unstable, how genocidal, how rotting to this core the system is, how much it relies on human misery, impoverishment, endless war, and
Yeah.
Israel and COVID has just sort of set the gears into motion of the end of the Western grip on the world and this neoliberal hegemonic post-Soviet order. Where it will go, I don't know. Right, we're in the middle of history. It's foggy right now, but there's a light at the end of this tunnel, and whether it's good or not, I can't tell.
That's why I think these elections, especially, are so currently important
Mm.
because as the people, you are currently like, whether whoever you're voting for, you are making such an important stance or such an important take in one of the most fundamental eras of recent history as well. We've not like everything that's happening in the world right now, a lot of shit has happened in the past 20, 30 years, but I think a lot of things are currently culminating right now. And I think depending on who you vote for, you have such an important role to make for the future. If the Democrats lose, then it's gonna be such what's it called? It's gonna set an important line. Like you drew a red line. You are like, you know, I don't care who you are or what your policies are. It's not enough the fact that you are not Trump. And people are complaining about Trump, but like the Democrats created Trump. Democrats are like the reason Donald Trump is as popular as he is because of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where have you seen the 2024 elections going? Like what? Because globally, this is the era of elections. What do you think the precedent has been set so far? Like left wing, right wing, neoliberal, milk toast. Like, what do you think?
Um, it's very similar to like the same elections that we keep seeing. Like I think we saw in 2020 and 2016 because I remember very vividly paying like so much attention to them, and it's the same thing where it's just like, oh, but we can't let this person win. Oh, we can't allow for a Trump presidency to happen. Three like years like sorry, three elections in a row, and it's sad like not much is actually changing and not much has actually changed. Joe Biden might be like the most liberal in a sense where he like, respects your pronouns type president, but um he's the same as Obama, he's the same as Clinton. It's the same thing that has existed and continues to exist. And I think that's more terrifying because it's like you haven't learned your lessons from before by seeing, oh, maybe these things and maybe these tactics is what led to this sort of conundrum that we're at right now. Maybe because we all voted for Hillary, instead of Bernie, we allowed for a Trump presidency.
Yeah.
I think it's just like such, they're too afraid to actually take a step that we can have such fundamental and drastic change and change their life.
Yeah.
But maybe they're just too afraid of that route. I don't know how you feel about it. What is your opinion about a potential Trump presidency though?
Um, Honestly, I don't see things changing. I do see it as bad, but I think basically it's just gonna create things that are inevitable in a many because like even if Project 2025 gets implemented in 2029 or 2034 or whatever that election year would be, 2032, I think. Uh, Basically, what the Democrats do is they normalize a lot of the Republicans' policies. So what's going to happen is eventually a Republican gets into office, they pass a lot of the Project 2025 things. A Democrat gets into office, they keep half of the policies from Project 2025, and then they move a little bit. They shift a little bit left on the other half of the policies, but not enough so that it actually does gets rid of them, and then they get lauded as like the most progressive candidate ever, and then rinse and repeat, right? It really is just a death spiral. The Western world is in a death spiral, like the UK, France, America. Well, France with Melachon, I think, had sort of broke through that death spiral a little bit with their left, but the UK politics and American politics seem to be just in a death spiral where both Democrats and Republicans are happily skipping along to end the human race, and it's not just our country, it's the whole world with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why everything has been drastically, even the Democrats have been drastic, like slowly progressing more and more and more and more right wing throughout the years. And like Republicans, same thing as them. It's constantly moving right wing. And it's like, let's talk, for example, about immigration, because that's such an important issue for so many people. It's like Joe Biden still continued building the wall. Joe Biden is
The border.
still had locked up kids in cages. And like recently you've been seeing with all these current immigration bills that are currently being passed, and even Joe Biden talking in Congress, he's taking a more hard line against immigration. Even very early on with Kamala Harris, and she went to Colombia, I believe, and what she was telling like the people there is like, do not come to the United States. They started taking a really hard anti-immigration stance, and people are becoming like, that's acceptable. It's like, where is the red line then?
I
It's like they're clearly like they're becoming the right. They're still becoming the right throughout every election. They're adopting more right wing policies,
yeah.
and you are fine with it. You know,
They normalize it. They make it
they normalize it.
they make it clear, basically. The Republicans pass crazy policies, and then the Democrats institutionalize it and make it normal within the media narrative and the minds of average liberals. It really reveals how much of a sham this illusion of democracy is. It really is just two sections of the same class, the rich, just passing their policies either with their gas on the pedal. Right, with the Republicans who like just ram these things through, or the Democrats who do it like very controlled and half measured, like and things like that.
No, I don't know if this is like a bit too conspiracy theory, but like it's just like a speculation that I have. I really wouldn't be surprised if I found out that the Democrats purposely, like they, because they knew about like the fact that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned. And even when they had the majority in Congress and the Senate, they could have done something about it. But I really feel that they literally allowed it to pass. They allowed the Supreme Court to take it away just so they can have something to rally against the Republicans. And it worked really, really well because the 22 elections where the Democrats gained a Senate seat and they didn't lose as horribly as they expected in Congress is because of a lot of people were outraged about like Roe v. Wade, um, being removed. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if the Democrats allowed this to happen. Like they didn't do anything about it, just so they can use it as um, what's it called? Um,
Campaign sort of thing.
campaign, yeah, campaign, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
Strategy. That's what I want to say. Campaign strategy.
No, you're good. Yeah, I mean, Obama in 2008, when both Democrats, so, we had a super majority of Democrats in the Senate and the House of Representatives. His first promise, his campaign promise, was to codify abortion rights into law, which wouldn't have allowed Roe v. Wade to have been overturned, but they didn't. They didn't. The Democrats are very controlled opposition. I think the American left often acts like a controlled opposition. Even like our more like what you call it, like radical elements, like the anarchistic elements will still be like calling for the overthrow of Maduro, or like war in, against Russia, or like war against China. Like we have a very controlled opposition that sort of just becomes institutionalized and accidentally or purposefully, in the case of liberals, acts as a lapdog of the bourgeois. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you think it's always been a controlled opposition though? Do you think like in previous years, like there was legitimate choices in the liberal capitalist world?
I think to a certain extent, um, I mean, if we look about, if he like, it was like there are certain things that existed back then that no longer exist now in certain like in two different ways. For example, like voting was a lot different before, for example, capitalists or in big corporations could start putting their say in this and start funding campaigns, which really started popping off in the 70s when Republicans first started taking money from organizations like the NRA and to prop up their campaign, and they started winning. And then Democrats started doing it as well. Like before that, there was a much more, how do I say, anti-capitalistic, more workers' rights implemented ideologies like what's his name? The president during World War II.
FDR.
FDR, yeah. FDR was also, I think, pushing, or maybe Truman as well. They were pushing as well for universal healthcare, and there wasn't like this big culture war kind of. There was racism. There was redlining. There was apartheid, but they were upfront about it, though. I guess, like to a certain extent. And I think when corporations started meddling more and more and more into it, and like this whole Reaganomics and trickle down economics, and there's, you know, these different leverages of um, prosperity and how certain people are starting to be really negatively affected by these policies.
Absolutely.
I think then that's when like this sort of fallacy started falling in place because they're now trying to really hide the fact that, oh no, we're not bought out. We're still representing your interests when, you know, more and more companies were being bought out. There's a statistic I saw, which again, I can't fully verify, but I remember seeing it talking about how election, the election campaign in, I think, 2008 or maybe 2020, 12, um, there was 12 billion or 18 billion in funding from different corporations and different people who wanted to invest in the campaign or donate to the campaign, like in campaign donations.
Yeah.
But in the 2020 elections, it was around 800 billion.
Yeah.
So, like, the amount of money that is being spent for lobbying and for these different purposes has skyrocketed so much. And I think like that's what's most fundamentally different now than it was, I guess, back then, is that we are seeing more and more corporate interests trying to hide or squeeze in without us noticing them existing.
Yeah. In my opinion, liberalism, capitalism has always been an illusion of democracy, like even social democracy. It's still like just there's still imperialism, there's still things like that. But you are given the workers like half measures and breathing room. But liberal democracy's own illusions seem to be going away, and it seems to be pushing the gas on the pedal of getting rid of whatever concessions it did give. And it cannot be denied that Americans did actually used to have real alternatives to the capitalist binary system when they were to elect Eugene Debs during World War I, for example, or during World War II, during that New Deal era, the American Communist Party had its highest membership. Like there were actual realistic avenues for alternatives to this capitalist system democratically. And I just think they've sort of over time gone away. And we've just sort of entered into like a more and more direct dictatorship of capitalism that's every single year sort of just getting rid of whatever illusions it gave us. If you want to pick
Yeah.
any of those threads, if you agree, disagree.
And it's, I think, becoming a lot more blatantly obvious
Yeah.
than it was back then. And I think also what's it called? The Cold War in general just really boosted fascism throughout the entire global world because of this competition who gets to be the global hegemony. The United States government really got away with doing a lot of fascistic things, whether shutting down certain parties, shutting down certain movements, you know, coups all around the world,
Secret
um,
organizations.
secret organizations, the CIA trying, like, CIA doing the most fucking crazy, out of whack, out of pocket thing ever, denying it and then revealing it 20 years later. I mean, I guess it's a joke, running, like, finding out the shit that CIA done. We're like, that's shocking, but I'm not surprised, you know what I mean? And I think the Cold War really played into that. And I think the idea of what Americans have now of what it means to be an American and what it means to, like, not be a leftist and not be a communist or not be a socialist is was really frightening. I mean, like, you could go to jail for being communist. And I think, but that's what's really different, being a lot different nowadays, because in America, you could say, I'm a communist. You could be very upfront about it and nothing will happen. And people no longer have the current stigma, or as much as it did back then, the current stigma of labeling yourself as a socialist or as a communist as there was back then. And I think this is giving more leeway for more left leaning organizations to pop up. And that's what's really different about nowadays, I think, specifically with the era of social media.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think it's as much of a generational struggle as it is, it's also a material struggle because boomers, whatever you want to call them, like Gen Xers, they lived in an era where they were rewarded by capitalism and they became meshed within the capitalist system through becoming homeowners. And once they became homeowners, it was their direct interest to preserve this system as much as they could and increase their equity. And I think as this new generation is unable to become homeowners, unable to find success within the capitalist system, they're more easily able to turn towards communism. Whereas boomers, communism meant that actually I have to give up some of my privileges for black people and indigenous people and, things like that, that they don't want to do, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And now it's with immigrants and Muslims,
Muslims. Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
I guess you can say.
Yeah, speaking of the Cold War, you did a video on why communism is easier to vilify than capitalism. Could you sort of expand that video? your points from the video, go over it, summarize it, things like that.
Yeah. I think I was talking essentially about how, when kind of looking at like the evils of history, a lot of people talk about like communism as also being one of the greatest evils besides Nazism that existed. And I think people do that a lot more than I guess you would say capitalism, or like the negative effects of things that exist under capitalism,
Yeah.
like the Congo genocide, for example. And I think it's just mainly, I read this paragraph from Slavoj Žižek's book, Violence. And, this specific part of the book was really interesting to me because he was essentially talking about how, when you look at communism and when you look at the crimes of communism, it's really easy to point a finger towards a perpetrator. It's like, you're a communist and you have a direct communist manifesto that says what you want, says what you believe. But with capitalism, it's kind of like there isn't a capitalist manifesto. There isn't like, a lot of the issues that do exist as a result of capitalism, you can really say, like, no, it's actually not capitalism. It's only like a systemic fault or a systemic problem. But like, if this anything that happens in a capitalistic society, if the same thing that happens in a, how you would say, a communist society or a capitalist society, people are more likely to blame this issue on the state or on the ideology if it is communism rather than capitalism. Because if it happens in a capitalistic society, it's not capitalism's fault at the end of the day, Like, point to me exactly why it is capitalism's fault. It's like, oh, because the corporation, well, the corporation doesn't necessarily mean capitalism. It could, like, no, it is. It's still part of the system. And I think perpetually people are constantly being like, that's why communism is evil, because it's a lot easier to point a finger towards, look at what communism did. And when you try to tell them about, look at what capitalism did, they can just like, do these insane mental gymnastics to be like, no, actually, no, it's not capitalism. No, it's actually this or that. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
essentially.
I think part of it is just that, yeah, there is like a sort of a capitalist manifesto, like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations and all these liberal writers and philosophers, but capitalism is so enmeshed within our superculture that it's just sort of the normal default opinion. And people realize that what is capitalism, right? And of course, there's like so much propaganda against, communist nations, of so much nuances left on out. We talk about so much about communist wrongs. We never even hear about communist rights, like how they were able to get rid of homelessness, eradicate
Hmm.
diseases, extend people's life expectancies. But it is funny that like people are able to not see like they're able to do like, yeah, the Holodomor, for example, or the Great Leap Forward. It was a horrible famine, but they're not able to do that with the Irish famine, the potato famine, or
Yeah,
the Bengal.
the Bengal famine.
Yeah, or they're able to say like, oh my god, the gulags were horrible prisons, and millions of people died in them, but they can't do British prisons in Africa or French prisons in colonial nations.
Oh, current American prisons
Current American
doing this.
have more people in them than the gulag ever did, which is insane. You know, um, and also do labor, like, labor,
Slavery.
and
Literally slavery.
at least on paper, in the gulags, people got paid fair wages. In America, I think in the gulags it was like 20% of your wage gets taken away, something like that. In America, you get paid pennies. You get paid
Mm.
pennies for an hour. It's insane. It's
No, it's crazy.
yeah, yeah, but
And it's written in, I think, the 14th Amendment, talking about how like when slavery was abolished, it's like slavery is abolished. But if you're a prisoner, then it's not abolished.
yeah, and
Like there's a specific,
who do they enslave? Mostly, I mean, who do they imprison? Mostly black people.
like, exactly. It's like, hey, we draw these weird lines that make sure you guys stay in poverty and live in the lands with, like, live in the areas with no fertile lands, nothing like redlining, no good investment. And then, oh, you're committing more crime. Oh, we give you a bit of crack. So now you have to go to prison. Oh, no. Oh, guys, we try to prevent slavery, but it's like black people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's even crazier than that. Shortly after slavery was ended, they even passed vagrancy laws, or I forget what they're called, but it's just like basically like standing around doing nothing. And those were just basically used to round up black people as many as they could, put them into prison, put them back to work forced. So yeah, it's insane. It is really insane. And That is the thing, like, it's hard to connect, the Belgian, Congo genocide with the capitalism for in the minds of a lot of people. That was just something that happened. I think what really gave capitalism an out was the global passing, around the 1960s of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and then, of course, a lot of nations followed suit. Like, being on paper, free and everybody being equal, I think gave capitalism a very big out, right? Because there's so much leeway now, right? If Sonia Massey is shot for boiling water, it's not because we're racist and black people aren't equal. It's because I was afraid for my life. This race and all these crimes are sort of washed away by like saying on paper that we are equal. If you want to
Yeah,
pay that.
no, exactly. And a lot of people don't even notice the subtleties of the like point to me a law where it says you can discriminate against like a black person. I'm like, okay, well, you can't directly point to a law that like says like, oh, black people are not allowed to do this or not allowed, or any minority group is not allowed to have this. All right, then let's look, for example, at another thing. Crack, which was distributed by the CIA during the 80s, is predominant within black communities within the United States. But cocaine, which is the same drug, is literally a crystallized form of cocaine. They're the same thing. And cocaine is predominantly used by rich white dudes, Wolf of Wall Street type dudes, ridiculous money, cocaine on hookers ass type dudes.
Yeah.
But the in a lot of states, I can't say that quote directly exactly which states, but like cocaine, if you get caught with it, is like what, 2 months, and like maybe you can get off on probation. Crack is 8 years. And I think like, well, a lot of people like, and that's a simple evidence that like, oh no, there is a lot of racist policies in racist institutions which are applied. And I think people just don't take the time to try to understand them or look at them more than just blatantly obvious in your face,
Yeah. Yeah. And
if you know what I mean.
I also think it's the inability to just recognize the successes of communist nations from like, the Soviet Union turned a peasant agricultural society into a spacefaring nation in just a couple of decades under all these limitations. China, very similarly, the greatest jump in life expectancy in recorded human history happened in China. And they have lifted very recently 800 million people out of poverty, but that doesn't even make it to the frontline news of America. What makes it to the news is China authoritarian, China this, China that. And that's not to say that these nations never did anything wrong, but it's that we never get a fair representation of them. We never get a fair representation of their successes and failures. We only get the failures, and the failures are overemphasized.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say this because then I want to issue a fair warning. I'm not supporting North Korea. I know it's like I'm not a big fan of North Korea.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like looking at the certain things that they say about North Koreans. It's like if there was a camp where, for example, North Koreans were shooting at like fat Americans or some shit, and then they're like the entire headlines were like, "Oh, look at how North Koreans view Americans. Look at how they're propagandizing their people. Look how fascistic they are." But then in America, like, have you played a Call of Duty game? The entire plot of you is shooting minorities. And it's just like because of that habit in like it's if the same things happen in the United States, it's overlooked. But if it's like happen in China or North Korea, look at how they're brainwashing their people.
It's so
And you remember,
overemphasized, yeah.
yeah, it's like you could say the same thing. It's like, oh, the United States, they will arrest your students for wearing
Sophia.
a kufiya or like a t-shirt with certain colors. It's like it's the same thing. You just say like if you tell people like, oh, Russia did this, they'll be like, oh, damn Russia. Or like, oh no, actually United States did this, then their entire minds would like be flipped. And I think it's just like people aren't recognizing like these things that you do to vilify these specific countries is just like racism that exists or like subconscious racism within you and you don't recognize, you know? Because if America does this, completely cool. I love shooting Arabs.
Right.
If like, yeah, I would much rather play a game where you shoot fat Americans. I think that's much more entertaining.
Oh, that would be a fun arcade game in Jordanian Chuck E. Cheese, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Really love that.
It is funny. I think Americans reveal that they are more proud. just as propagandized as they claim North Koreans to be. Whenever they say crazy things about North Koreans, oh my God, North Koreans recently took photos with the Olympians took photos with the South Koreans, and everybody is saying, oh my God, they're gonna get executed, yada yada this, yada yada that.
Oh,
That
I
reveals
saw that.
that reveals so much more about you being propagandized than the North Koreans being propagandized, because you have completely swallowed your state narratives about this country unthinkingly. And also it's the fact that these countries are presented with a 5-minute memory, right? Within the American conception. Like the Kim Il Sung government was when North Korea and South Korea were split. The Kim Il Sung government was popular in both North and South. It was very similar to North and South Vietnam. The elections in North and South Vietnam, very likely communism would have won. Very likely communism would have won in both hemispheres. And America basically, when North Korea tried to free the South from the American backed dictatorship of Sigmund Rhee that was unpopularly enforced, in which America had to get rid of a lot of democratic councils that were locally supporting communism and workers were supporting them. America did a genocide against the Koreans, very similar to what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. All the buildings destroyed. People were forced to live underground, just like the Al Qassam brigades have to fight underground with underground tunnels and things like that. And so it relies on a 5-minute memory. Most Americans do not know the history. Like if you study Korean history objectively, North Korea is the victim of American genocide. That is undeniable. What Israel has done to Palestine, North Korea has done. I mean, America has done to North Korea. But American propaganda relies on this 5-minute memory where North Korea just suddenly popped out of existence, hating America, wanting to bomb it and nuclear bomb it, and feels far more about how Americans are propagandized than what we claim the other side is.
Yeah, it is just like their view entirely of a lot of people is built on like what media shows them and what their image is from like movies or like certain communities. And it's like people are still do ask me, it's like, do I ride camels to school?
Huh?
And it's just completely why. Little did they know I'm absolutely terrified of camels. They're scary motherfuckers.
Yeah.
That's me. It's completely the opposite. And it's just like I think it's also like it's not just like lack of education. Well, I do think that's also something that exists. I think it's like it's difficult to gain empathy for a lot of people, especially, some people would look at it as a genocide. It's like they can recognize a genocide is bad. They can recognize that it's awful. They can recognize it, but they don't know how truly awful it is. They think like they would go for like, for example, they're like, yeah, it's not as bad, or like they can't fully conceptualize how bad it is. It's the same way like um if like I haven't lost a parent, for example, my parents are alive, but I can imagine that losing a father or a mother would be bad. I just can't imagine or conceptualize how bad it would be because I've never experienced it. And I think it's the same for a lot of people who live too comfortably for like their entire life, which I'm not shaming. It's like, you know, but like they've lived such a comfortable life that they can't conceptualize what it means to not have water for days or to literally lose all your family members overnight,
Yeah. Or
or how horrible it.
be subject to American sanctions, like Iran is, North Korea is,
Exactly.
Venezuela is. Not being able to buy. I mean, the closest I think Americans ever got a taste of, and I'm not saying getting a taste of it is good or Americans deserve this, but I think the closest Americans ever got was the shortages during COVID, where we weren't able to buy toilet paper. That was the first time Americans ever experienced what it's like to be an Iranian under American sanctions.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah. Or like even like 9/11, which is like, you
obviously
know,
bad. Yeah,
ob- obviously bad and obviously like,
based.
a big deal, but it's just like, but at the same time, it's like 9/11 is like a daily occurrence for a lot of people in a lot of daily regions. Like they have like experienced 10 9/11s a month or
Absolutely,
like 10, like 100 9/11s a year. It's just like,
and Americans
it's
stand
like,
behind them.
exactly. And it's like, it's like it's like when, I think Hassan B was talking about 9/11, how Americans deserve it, which by the way, I think is taken out of context. I think like he was talking about like, that it was a consequence of America's funding of like wars on terror in the Middle East and like them propping up extremists.
Mhm.
And I think they can't recognize it. I think they can't recognize the fact that like things like this happen is because you allow them to. It's like
Yeah.
they look at Arabs or like look at Muslims and think of them as being inherently violent. And it's just like, why? It's like, do you honestly believe in your whole mind that some people are just like born with some chemistry different in their brain that becomes violent? No, a lot of like this violence that emerged within the Middle East, the reason like that Al Qaeda emerged is literally because of you funding these organizations in the first place to fight the Soviets, and because you also, what's it called, started bombing random people for no reason. And it's like if I grew up in Iraq, which by the way, I've heard a lot of horrific story from Iraqi migrants coming over and him talking about how like when they go to smell bread, they have to just escape bombs and almost everything they can smell is just like burning bodies. It's like, of course you become an extremist. Of course, like all you want is just to like exert the same sort of pain to the people who exerted this pain on you.
Yeah.
And like the only way to even stop stuff like prevent even another event like 9/11, which or like any like attacks that do exist or any like violence towards you essentially is like you have to be the person to draw that line and stop it in the first place by not voting these people in who continuously do this over and over again.
Yeah. I think being on the ground in America, deconstructing Americanism is such a painful ego death for a lot of people. Like the conception of America itself is tied to people's personal identities. It is them.
Mhm.
And so to recognize that, oh my God, this country that I have been raised to cherish and love since I was in kindergarten is behind a genocide in the Middle East, and that I, to some extent, am responsible for it is so painful that you have to come up with an excuse for it, right? You have to come up with an excuse for it that, you know what, these people are less human, they're violent, they deserve it, they did October 7th. It becomes a way
Yeah.
or you know what, I don't care about what's going on overseas, I only care about my family. It becomes a way to just because it's such a painful ego death to undo Americanism and everything you've been taught by the media,
Mhm.
movies, by education. And in addition to that, I just think it's like self-preservation. It's painful to admit that you're wrong. It's painful to admit that, this system it's just a very painful process.
Yeah, or that your country might be bad or that your country might be wrong in a certain instance, because America always highlighted itself as this beacon of good, beacon of hope, beacon of freedom, of democracy, of whatever the fuck, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just like when they're acting completely the opposite, I think that's what's terrifying. I think like now it's being really exposed a lot is because we have like the Ukraine war in comparison to the war in Gaza. We saw directly how the West reacted to a conflict, to a war that is happening in Ukraine versus directly how they reacted to this almost the same thing that is happening to Palestinians. Read an article about like how the West describes Russia bombing a hospital versus Israel bombing a hospital,
Yeah.
or the way politicians would react. I think like something made me really laugh because like I think Chuck Schumer or someone was talking about how like it's shameful that these Bengal like that the Bengal government was like treating their protesters or their student protesters. It's like what are you talking? That it shouldn't like that what you did with the protesters was like in fucking April. It's not that long ago. And now you want to talk about like how you treat these people. It's just like people are, I don't know if people are just not seeing these constant contradictions between what the politicians say to these things versus what they say to these things, or this area versus that area.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think America always has to come up with excuses like, but the other country is so much worse. I mean, I've heard endlessly about Tiananmen Square. The Tiananmen Square, the Chinese brutal repression of the Tiananmen Square protests. But whereas the America's had several Tiananmen Square incidents just in the past
Mhm.
couple months. With the flower massacre was like sort of a Tiananmen Square level event, and yet that happened and went within the media storm, and everybody's just forgotten about it. We had several flower massacres in Gaza, but we're still talking about Tiananmen Square. It happened. It's
Yeah.
very conscious within Americans' minds. I just think it's so hard to just deconstruct everything you've been taught, and it's just painful, and people have to come up with excuses to get rid of that uncomfortable feeling. It's to stop you from, people get so close to a logical conclusion, right? Dialectical materialism. Everybody is a dialectical materialist, right? Everybody is a scientist
Mhm.
who is able to get to the logical conclusion of that capitalism is bad, that imperialism is bad, that this is racism. But sometimes along that journey, some people get to this step that's so uncomfortable, this hurdle that's so uncomfortable to overcome, that they just create like a phantasm. They create like an excuse to stop their journey there, I think, and that's what a lot of Americans are doing. Um, yeah, and also I think it speaks to how after the Civil Rights Act passed, open racism became unsexy, but systemic racism was still there,
Yeah.
right? Systemic racism still is very much alive. It's just openly calling somebody the N word is unsexy, but systemically calling somebody the N word is very sexy. It reminds me of that this one skit by a black comedian. I forget his name, but he said like, "What is a low credit score? It's just them calling you the N word, right? like what is getting stopped by the police? It's just them calling you the N word." And I think very openly, the media response to Ukraine and Palestine has revealed this contradiction.
Yeah, it just all depends if you can directly point the finger to it. If there's any leeway for you to deny it, then you can. It's kind of like trying to justify racism and trying to justify hatred with a different way. It's kind of like how a lot of people right now are justifying homophobia and transphobia with children. It's like I saw someone talking about like this allegory, talking about like how if you personally don't like pineapples on pizza, and you want people to stop eating pineapples on pizza, you can't convince them because at the end of the day, it's your own opinion. Like,
Right.
you know, you can't make it illegal. But if all of a sudden you found like a child has a pineapple allergy, had a pineapple pizza and died, then you can point your fingers and say, "Oh, look, no, but pineapple on pizza kills children, and that's why we have to outlaw pineapples on pizzas." And people find a plausibility with it. If you if there isn't a direct line of connection. It's like it's the same thing with how they're able to easily vilify gay people and trans people. It's like, oh no, look, no, they're doing this to children. We're not being racist. We're not being sorry homophobic or transphobic. We just care about the children. And it's the same thing now. We are not being racist. We're just following law. We're just following orders. Like, just follow the orders, man, and you would be fine.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, white supremacy so often operates in this room for error. Like I've even seen so many people like Tucker Carlson or something like promote that the great replacement theory, which is a neo-Nazi theory. But
yeah,
they'll always preface it with like, I'm not racist, but isn't it a little weird that Indian people are breeding more than American people in America? Like white people in America or something like that. Like I've seen so many white supremacists do that where
yeah,
even people who say the N-word or something like that will swear up to down, like, "I'm not racist. I'm not racist." Nobody wants to be racist. It's very unsexy. But
they like it. It's like this video. This guy is really good. He on YouTube, he talks constantly about like the alt-right pipeline and how people like this generally about the alt-right. Give an example of how like Nazis don't like when you want to say the word Nazi, you don't picture Hitler, you don't picture all the horrific things that they've done. Because a lot of them like publicly would just say that shit is bad. They might say different shits between themselves, but publicly they like don't want to associate themselves with this negative image of it. And I think now even they're trying to come up with a new form of racism, racism 2.0, whatever you want to call it, where like white supremacists are not saying like, oh, black people are genetically inferior. They're like, oh, it's best that people are kept to certain communities and other people stay in their own communities, just not to mix these communities. I'm not being racist. I don't hate them. I just think people work better within their own communities.
yeah,
And then, you know, it's just like they always find loopholes between like how can I be racist without appearing racist? How can I be transphobic without appearing transphobic? And it's making a lot more people comfortable with saying transphobic shit and saying that, like, oh, but like, I don't want like a trans person telling my child what to wear, even though like they're literally just telling them to be themselves.
yeah, yeah. I also think part of it is how neoliberalism is so empty when it adopts trans language, when it adopts liberatory language. The left, quote unquote, that's the mainstream in most people's minds, which isn't a real left, it's controlled opposition. So often we'll say like, yeah, 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 black people, hell yeah, but it won't materially actually benefit black people whatsoever. And this empty facade, a lot of people are able to see through how it's just done for political points, but they come to the wrong conclusions. Obviously, that it's black people representation in general is bad, and it's like no, this empty representation is it's representation is good, but it's bad when it's empty and it doesn't have any material backing to it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I do agree on this. Um, there was one thing that I also wanted to ask you. Um, when like when did you, because I also want to try to get like a bit of the American perspective of it. It's like when did you start becoming, I guess, more conscious and more aware of what is happening in like Palestine and like global issues as well, such as this one? Because like um I feel like a lot of people are now starting to understand more what is happening in Palestine in 2023, 2024 than they have before. I'm just wondering if you are like more recently um knowing what is happening, or have you been aware of it for a while?
I've been aware of the Palestine thing since like 2012, 2013. That's when I started like seriously like educating myself on the world and things like that. So I would always hear about how horrible Israel is and it's just small things like that. But I didn't do like a serious study of Palestine's history until like October 7th. That's when like I picked up like A Hundred Years War by Rashid Tlaib and I read PLO documents and things like that. So I'd been like ancillary aware of American imperialism in the Middle East, but like I didn't do a serious study about Palestine until October 7th because I'm lazy. I don't like reading books unless I absolutely have. So, I had to educate myself, like when it's right in front of you, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you take any like did you do uni? Did you take any politics in uni when it came to like these things?
I had a history degree, so but my main focus
Okay.
Latin America and Asia. So I was very uninformed on the Middle East. I did take a couple courses on the Middle East that sort of situated myself properly. Middle Eastern history in general, geography, things like that. So I do know a little bit about like obviously like Nasserist Egypt and the Algier Wars, so I do know like the surface level, so a little bit more than the average American, you could say, but I'm not an expert by no means on
Yeah.
Africa or the Middle East.
I mean, it's also still a bit too complicated. It's still like complicated even for me
Yeah.
trying to keep up with all the bullshit. But yeah, I'm just also gonna tie this back essentially. And something I also wanted to say before is when like the Western world tries to pin the blame of certain issues or developmental issues, whether it's in the Middle East or in Africa, as like a backwardness. It's the same thing with that happened in the Qatar World Cup, where they're like, no, don't go there, boycott them because they're anti LGBTQ. And while I agree, it's bad to be anti LGBTQ, but the reason there is, for example, problems like for either their view on women or their homophobia or a lot of their racism is because of colonialism, is because they entered their world.
Yeah.
Sexuality within this region used to be a lot more open, a lot more fluid. It was much more okay during the Ottoman region or Ottoman Empire time for people to be gay, and it was a lot less, or even in a lot of different African nations, it was a lot less stigmatized.
Yep.
But when the West came and started introducing Christianity, and telling them that no, being gay is bad. No, this is a woman's position in the world. No, this is how you treat this person. This is how you treat that person. And then it started becoming integrated within their culture. And even a lot of the anti LGBTQ laws that exist within African countries and Middle Eastern countries have been created during colonial times. And I just find it like frustrating when the people try to, you know, when the West just recently all of a sudden became like, oh no, we support gay people, so now we can judge you for not. So we're like being this, and they want to play themselves as the white savior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, it's like funny, like, for example, during the Cold War, America was so immensely sexist. It was, in fact, the Russians, the Soviets, Eastern Europe, that was all for women's rights. They have
Yeah.
the reason that there are so many female scientists in Eastern Europe, they have some of the highest rates in the world, or doctors, is because the Soviet Union emphasized giving women education and them being on an equal plane with men. And only recently, like the sexual revolution and all those things were the 70s, right? So like women really like our modern day conceptions of women's rights within the West only really came in the 70s in America. I'm not sure about Europe, probably before a little bit, but um our conceptions of these rights are so recent, and we judge other countries for not being able to catch up when we're just barely caught up. We just barely caught up.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Looking at like all the
of us, you know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like just generally, a lot of these problems that do exist right now, even homophobia and racism and all of this is literally like I hate being that person that constantly says it's capitalism's fault, but it's literally like all ties back into capitalism and corporate interests and the West and their hegemony and white supremacy at the same time.
Yeah.
Because colonialism was capitalism. It's inevitable. With capitalism, you're bound to have colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, what is colonialism? It's basically capitalism is a competition. You win that competition at home. Every single competition has losers and winners. Once you win the competition in your home country, you suddenly look at the global scale and you try winning the competition on the whole globe, right? You expand out.
Yeah,
It's
if you could like if
con-
yeah, if you could take more land and make more money, have more like what's it called? Cents to your buck or bucks to
destroy your
your
competitors.
yeah, exactly. And like, oh, I can take this country and I can make more money and I can beat France. And France goes like, oh, I could also take this and try to compete on an equal field. And then Japan is also like, hey, I'm missing out. All of you guys are getting a lot of shit. I might as well do it. It just colonialism pushes other countries to commit more colonialism. And it's such a powerful and profitable entity that it still exists today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It still does.
Absolutely. And I think right now we're sort of just grappling with the idea of like, what is democracy? Like, is liberalism and capitalism a democracy? Like I, as a communist, obviously argue that like, democracy is when workers, like the working class, is in control. But for example, we have this little island called Cuba where people are able to directly through committees for the defense of the revolution and through popular polar bars, I'm mispronouncing the hell out of that, are able to directly interact with their government. Every 6 months, their representatives have to come to meetings and get roasted by their constituents about why aren't you meeting this demand? Why aren't you meeting that demand? And in America, you go to the most direct democracy you can have is you go to a city council meeting and you go up there and you say, "Hey, fuck you, fund my school," and they say, "Fuck no," and then that's it. Like, there's not that much direct participation. It's very much corporate control. So I think we're grappling with the idea of what is democracy, and I think we're getting revealed that this is sort of a sham of democracy. If you
It is.
agree,
It's
disagree.
a prox. What's the word? Also, it's like a proxy democracy. It's kind of there.
Mm,
But it's really not. It's kind of a democracy where you do have some choice, but you still don't have the entirety of the choice. Because if you want, for example, like an increase in minimum wage, but then like Starbucks is like, I don't want that. And they can just spend millions of dollars lobbying and then, oh, you can't like increase your minimum wage all of a sudden. And it's like, okay, what part of that is democracy if like your intentions contradict the intentions of the capitalists, which is always does. And the capitalists always win, or most of the time win with their favor, then does that really make it a democracy? Is it a democracy again if you can't vote for your boss? If you can't vote for these corporations who have such big influence on your life and the current world that exists today, then are you even a democracy?
yeah.
If like the only reason you're voting for someone is because you're afraid someone else might win, then is that even a democracy? Um, and it's if you can't have like so much direct say, and even with America, with a lot of whole things besides gerrymandering, besides the problem of like the electoral system, you know, besides everything, it's like at what point are you just gonna be tired enough of trying to actually promote a functioning democracy? If this is, by the way, then one of the main identities of the states is being a democracy again and a beacon of freedom
Mm, absolutely.
and everything, then you should try your best to kind of promote that and push that and make sure that your future is sustainable, and that like if you want a change in your community, then you can have a direct say in this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's absolutely wild is that a lot of the times American people are overwhelmingly on the right, what you can quote unquote say is the right side. Like overwhelmingly American people want universal health care. You know, it's always polling at like 55%, 60%. Overwhelmingly like 55%, 60% of American people want the government to tackle climate change. But these changes don't happen. And then it just goes back to the question like, is this a democracy or you know, you can say so many things about China and criticize it, and I do, and you know, it is obviously not perfect by any means. But China, whenever the Chinese people want to do green energy, China has become the biggest investor within green energy, right? Whenever the Chinese people want rural investment, China invests in rural communities and has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It just goes to down to the question of like, what is democracy? And I just think we're getting revealed that this is sort of a pseudo democracy where like we do have choices, but they're very controlled choices. This is as much of a one party state as any dictatorship is.
Yeah, yeah. And it just constantly tries to build itself as no, it's actually functioning, or no, it's actually working, by highlighting certain aspects of it. And I think a problem also as to why it does not change too much, or why it doesn't do so much change, is because there are too many people out there that always believe that, like, I agree that the problem exists, but it's not up to me to fix it. Like, they never see themselves as like, they're like, someone else will fix it. Oh, climate change. I'm sure the scientists will figure it out. I'm sure someone will like fucking like, there'll be another, a revolutionary who will take care of it. Someone else will do it. And that's why it works so well in the American and Western world, not just America, Europe as well. It builds too much on individualism, the ideology of individualism. It's one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced in Europe, is seeing how like individualistic people are when it comes to either spending their money, being like, no, I don't want to like um drive you there. You can just drive yourself, or like, oh, pay me back for like this pizza bite that you had, which is, by the way, a real thing. Someone wanted to like, on like what you would say, Venmo me for like a bite of a pizza that they took, and it's just like, and that's crazy.
Right.
That's just saying like they don't have a community, and at the end of the day, it just like, it doesn't make them look at themselves as a singular group and a singular entity that can overtake the system, can apply fundamental change in their life, and can change the world. They always feel like, I'm not enough.
Yeah.
That's what prohibits people from doing so many changes. It's like, why should I boycott this? Because what change am I gonna make? Why should I like, stop eating meat, for example? What change am I gonna make? Why should I stop doing this, doing that, doing this? Because they just can't see themselves making any change. They see themselves as one person versus a mountain.
Yeah. Yeah. Marx had this conception of alienation. And basically, the idea was that you basically become this drone on an assembly line in a factory, you know, because that was what Marx was
Mhm.
operating in, because it was when Europe was industrializing. And you're such a drone that you're alienated from even what you create, right? Like before, we used to have artisans who knew every single aspect of the process of the creation of a commodity. Now you're just one part in the cog of a big machine, and you put on buttons on a shirt and you never sometimes even see the shirt that you make. So you're alienated from the product of your own labor. And this alienation gets to the point where you're alienated from yourself as a human being. You're alienated from other people around you. And I think countries outside of the West, they still hold on to this pre-capitalist communalism, right? You know, people live with their parents. You still have like a very healthy sense of community. But I think the West has uh, entered into that final stage of capitalist alienation, this like high cultural alienation where we're all these individuals that are unable to see this beautiful web of humanity that connects us all. And you know, we view the Chinese or East Asians as these like mindless drones, right? That are all communalists. And you know what? Communalism, this communalist culture has its issues, right? Like obviously there's autonomy issues sometimes. See, people feel suffocated from it, But we are on the other complete end of it where we're just so alienated that we cannot even. I mean, I've never talked to my neighbors before, right? Like I've lived
Yeah,
with these people for 20 years, but it's just American culture where you do not talk to anybody anymore. There's no community anymore.
yeah, yeah. And you would find like that a lot. Like it's different in non-capitalistic nations because like you have like in Jordan, for example, you everyone talks to everyone, their neighbors, they become friends with people who are doctors because sometimes you can't afford to go to a doctor if there's an emergency. And if you have a friend who's a doctor and like maybe they can pay for your services and maybe you're a mechanic. So if your friend needs a problem, I can hopefully fix these cars. And adults like since they don't want to rely too much on like money as their identity and that they can just buy themselves or fix their own solutions, they start building these relationships with each other even if it's like for their own interest, I guess, but like it just builds the community stronger together and not everything has to be solved through money.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, Michael Parenti, I always go back to Michael Parenti, but, in his book, Black Shirts and Reds, he's talking about, people who left from the Soviet Union to Israel, and they're writing back letters, and the biggest complaints that they're making is like, "Oh my god, there's no more sense of community anymore," and, I'm able
Mhm.
to get, like, these great commodities, like, I have access to, like, Hershey chocolates, but I'm not taken care of anymore. I don't have any more guarantees like a pension or like what you call it, like a state pension or a guaranteed job by the state. And I can't even afford the fucking Hershey's bars, I can't afford the nice jeans, So it's just this twisted conception of individualistic freedom that we have, and it's slavery in itself, but we don't realize it's slavery. I think that's what's so hard for us to recognize that this individualism is in itself a form of slavery.
No, exactly. Because like if you think about what slavery was, you had your master who worked you long hours, but he still at the end of the day, I guess, gave you food and a shelter.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and now you work all day. They give you money so you can buy from them the chocolate and the food and like for your apartment.
And
So it's
you
like
made the
this,
chocolate and the food. So you're just buying.
and you make a chocolate with the food.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
It is truly insane, yeah.
it's just something that sounds when I worked at a coffee shop, it's just like I made like my salary in 2 drinks or like there's a single drink. I made 1 drink and that was my salary for the hour.
That is ins
And then and then I see my boss pull up in his like Mercedes Benz. And I'm like, my God.
that is insane. Yeah, it's why, Marx and Engels called being a worker under capitalism worse than slavery, because at least after slavery, you had some guarantees like a job or something or food on the table, like, even if it was awful. And,
No, exactly.
you know yeah.
I just don't understand. It's like even if you make in a lot of states, in a lot of areas in the world, even if you make like double your salary, double the minimum wage. Sorry, if you make double the minimum wage, you will still, by the end of the month, be in debt. And that's not enough to pay for all your expenses.
Yeah.
You need to be making like at least 100,000 a month. I mean, even like my girlfriend's aunt, she lives in New York, and she was telling me like she gets paid like well, I think maybe 120K, 100 like over 100K a year.
Mhm.
And she was telling me how like if she lost her job, then like she only will have enough money for 3 months.
Mm.
And that's absolutely insane. You make 100K a year and you will lose everything in 3 months
Yeah.
without a job.
Yeah. Yeah,
That is wild.
insane. It is insane. It really is.
She's in New York. I don't know, like maybe that's just New York being New York.
No, it's all of America, there nobody can afford an apartment on a minimum wage in any county in America anymore. And that is insane. And I think, America and Western Europe are sort of the testing ground for what the capitalists want to do through the rest of the globe. I think that's the dangerous thing. Both the global South is the testing ground for things, and then we're also the testing ground for what we want to export. Like neoliberalism and things like that. And so they're trying to export this individualistic culture, and this individualism and this breaking down of communalism, to other countries, and it's sort of working. Like in India, for example, a lot of people are leaving their parents and starting to live in apartments in big cities, and slowly but surely,
Mhm.
they're trying to take this thing global, which, there's issues with that communalistic culture, right? Like being so reliant on your parents, not having that autonomy, having that societal pressure. But there's great things about it that are being eroded as it gets exported.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just also from a lot of different senses. Like there's also within the capitalistic world, there's a lot of shame and a lot of stigma with not having a job, still living with your parents, and still relying on others for anything, even though that's a completely normal thing. As a matter of fact, like, you know, most of humanity's existence, like kids are raised by an entire community. You would have your tribe, and like the kids would play together, and they're not just raised by two parents, but they're raised by like your aunt, your uncle, everyone else around you. You all live near each other. If you can't do something, someone else will help. And I think that when we're becoming more disconnected by it, just living on its own becomes a difficult thing, and you just become more lonely as a result of it.
Yeah.
And people need to just think of like, it's okay to be living with your parents. We live in a society where it's just like, it's fine. Who gives a fuck?
Yep.
Maybe if you want to go out for your own autonomy, go for it. But like, if you're comfortable with it and if it's like the most sustainable thing, also go for it. I don't think like these things should be shamed between these people. And I think like that's also something that keeps pushing capitalism forward is that no, you need to have a job, and we created successfully made it stigmatized that you don't have a job and that you don't do this and that what you like, what your job is only profitable. Oh, you like dinosaurs? Who gives a fuck? It pays like what, like 20K a year, 40K a year. It's not like a like, it's just like you can't end up doing the things you like. It's like, oh, I love poetry. It's like, all right, good luck becoming a successful poet or just selling shit. Like
Yeah.
none of that. Yeah, even if you're great, you need to be fucking lucky and have a good agent and maybe be good looking, have enough good followers for you to publish your own thing. But like at the end of the day, you can never even do what you want.
Yeah, it's such a false sense of freedom. We have such a false sense of freedom. Uh where we're just forced to essentially be cogs in the machine, but we're sold at it as freedom. And I mean, going back to that slavery thing, obviously, we have won rights within the West, and we have exported a
Mhm.
lot of those slave aspects to other countries. But I don't know. I think a lot of Americans do feel, even the successful ones who are doing great, feel suffocated by the system still feel like they are slaves, still feel like they're cogs in the machine, still feel like their lives don't matter. And it's just a depressing alienation that even if you are successful in this system, as the system defines it, you're still just a miserable human being. I think even the people who are on the quote unquote top of the system, not the ultra rich, but like the upper middle class, who are still workers, of course, but very successful workers, are still miserable to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. It's just like the what's it called? Sunken cost fallacy. You already put too much in it. Why back away?
All right.
It's like why people still play Clash of Clans. It's been 8 years. It's been 8 years, man. Just let it go. You're like not getting anything just because you're too deep into it.
Oh my god. I accidentally doxed myself, I think, on when I was 13 because I gave away my emails to these free generate
Oh
free
no.
gems or something sites. Or I got hacked on a couple emails like that. But yeah.
It's completely ahead.
This has been a lovely conversation. We're coming up on the 2 hour, 30-minute mark. And
Yeah, this is crazy.
I think we'll just end it here. Are there any last words? Tell the people where they can find you. And yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, man, it's been a complete pleasure. For everyone doesn't know, this is basically the first time we're even talking to each other on video call, and I think um I don't know, it's just been such a great experience and it's a delightful experience, and I hope like more people, especially like that are coming up or like people who talk politics to start engaging with each other because I think like
Absolutely.
even now, just like the most important thing you can do as a community is just talk with each other, share your ideas, see what is plausible, you know? And you can find me on TikTok, Adam Medinat. I think I'm going to be hopefully at some point opening a YouTube channel because I think there's a lot more on TikTok that can be said. And I think you as a creator, you understand the limitations of TikTok
Yeah.
as an app and like the crazy different censorship and loopholes that you have to go through to not say a single word. And Yeah, I just hope everyone can start also listening more thoroughly when it comes to like people like Arabs, for example, talking about a certain problem is saying why you should be listening to this, why you should be focusing on this, why this thing is important. I think a lot of people take too much time out of their day to argue with them, but everything is coming from a certain place and like you don't understand it. The best you can do is just open up and listen to what everyone is saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolutely lovely conversation. I'd love to have you on again. And thank you so much for hopping on this with me.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it's still daytime.
you have a lovely night.
This past midnight. Good night, man.
Sweet.
Have a great night. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye bye. This episode of the Pokepreet Pod has been brought to you by our generous members on our Patreon. If you'd like to become one of them, go to patreon.com/thepokepreetpod. Thank you. What the fuck? Glory to Stalin. I barely. And a special shout out to our Marshal of the Soviet Union member, Mateus T. If you'd also like a shout out, please consider subscribing to our Patreon, where you can also get episodes up to a month early. Thank you. This episode of the Pokepreet Pod has been brought to you by our generous members on our Patreon. If you'd like to become one of them, go to patreon.com/thepokepreetpod. Thank you. What the fuck? Glory to Stalin. I barely. And a special shout out to our Marshal of the Soviet Union member, Mateus T. If you'd also like a shout out, please consider subscribing to our Patreon, where you can also get episodes up to a month early. Thank you.